Good morning. You're too kind. You're too kind. Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Phil Ewing. I'm the editor of Politico Pro Defense, and I want to welcome you all to our Cyber7 event. We've got a great event scheduled for today, and let's just jump right into it. We're going to talk about the 7 key questions driving the cybersecurity agenda here in town. On your chair, you should have our latest agenda for the run of show this morning, so if you want to take a look at that, you can get all the details. But while I'm up here, I will tell you a little bit about what you're going to see this morning. We're also in Cyber World as well as talking about Cyber World, so thank you to everyone who's watching our live stream right now. Our program this morning will include a lot of top players and a lot of important guests, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them, I think, as much as you are. Their names include General Keith Alexander, who's the director of the NSA. You may have heard of him. Richard Bedschlik of Mandiant, Senator Saxby Chambliss, Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, Chris Finan of the Truman National Security Project, Tom Kellerman of Trend Micro, Trey Hodgkins of Tech America, Jay Kaplan of SINAC, Tara Mahler of the New America Foundation, Congressman Mike McCall, Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, Congressman Mike Rogers, Tim Sample of Battelle, Congressman Adam Schiff and Congressman Adam Schiff and Congressman Mac Thornberry of Texas. Phyllis Schleck and Michael Daniel could not join us today, so if you saw their names on some of the early programs and materials, they're not going to be able to be here, but we're going to have a great conversation with the guests that were able to come. Before we get started, I would like to say thank you to our sponsor, Raytheon, for helping us put on this event this morning. And I wanted to ask Jeff Snyder, who's Vice President of Cyber for Raytheon, to come up and say a few words before we get started. After you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful morning to be here, and I want to thank all of you for attending this. These events are so important to raise the awareness of the growing cyber threat environment and mitigation strategies. So critical to protecting our nation from the growing cyber threat. So thank you, and I recognize many in the audience as those of you who really understand this cyber domain and participated in it on a daily basis. Thank you for folks like Tracy Gray, who's been helpful in orchestrating this. Jack Harrington, who you'll hear from in a little while, who runs our cyber business at Raytheon, which is very critical to our company as we protect our products, which we design, develop, produce, and deploy around the world in 80 countries, as we protect our infrastructure to harden it from the cyber threat, and as we protect our clients. So very, very critical to everything that Raytheon does. I also want to thank the great speakers that Phil just mentioned. It's a wonderful lineup that you've orchestrated, and thank you for that, as we continue to raise the awareness of this very, very important event. And a special thanks to General Alexander, who will be here shortly. Some of us in this room had the opportunity to spend time with him last week at the AFCEA annual awards event, where he was the recipient of the Sarnoff Award, the annual award for the recognized individual that AFCEA recognizes. So thanks to him for the great service he's done to this nation, both as the director of NSA and the director of Cyber Command. So with that, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to this very important messaging through 7 questions that Phil has outlined. So I'd like to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Raytheon. Throughout the promotion of this event, we featured several different puzzles for people to solve, cyber-type puzzles. And we tallied the scores, and the individual who successfully completed the most of them is Paul Selker, who's the president of Spark Street Digital. So congratulations to him, if he's watching, for completing those. One final note, you heard earlier to please silence your mobile devices, but keep them handy, because our conversation is also going to be taking place on Twitter. The hashtag for today is Cyber7, and that's the number 7. Our reporters are going to be tracking your questions through cyberspace with an iPad here on stage, and so if you want to interact with them throughout the morning, please do so on Twitter. So let me kick things off for our first conversation and welcome up our reporters, my colleagues Tony Rahm and Juana Summers.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. As introduced by Phil, got a great group here. Richard, Senator Chambliss, Chris Finan, and Tim Sample. You know, the original idea when we sat down to come up with Cyber7 was to ask 7 major questions in cybersecurity. And here we're hoping to explore what the president's executive order might mean for cybersecurity and what the key threats are. But it almost seems crazy not to ask the even bigger political question right now, which is what on earth is happening with the government shutdown? Plenty of folks have said that the government shutdown has serious impacts on cybersecurity policy and cybersecurity protection. So I thought we would start there. And Senator Chambliss, I'm wondering if you can lead us off. Give us a sense of where we are in the process right now and what the shutdown means for cybersecurity and the debate on Capitol Hill.
Well, I'm just glad you invited me down here this morning so I'll have something to occupy my time today. Because we're not doing very much in the Senate. The House is actually moving, as you've probably seen, these mini bills through and sending them over to us, and it's like falling in a black hole once it gets to the Senate. Doesn't appear to be much movement at all between the White House and the leaders on Capitol Hill as of last night. But, you know, these things tend to play themselves out, and hopefully we're going to see some movement this week. The longer we go, the more obvious it becomes that there's probably going to be a tie between the CR and the debt ceiling. We have very little, if any, negotiating room on the CR, but we have a lot on the debt ceiling. And the president's going to have to recognize that, and he's going to have to be willing to sit down, and I'm hopeful that's going to happen short term. What does it do for cybersecurity? Well, it does for cybersecurity what it's doing for every other federal program, and that is we just don't have uncertainty of the funding there. And we need to have an IC bill passed that's going to fund the intelligence community going forward, because if we ever slow down or have to take a step backwards because of a lack of funding, then it just gives the bad guys more of an opportunity to encroach on our space and do things that or we're not able to do the defensive measures that we need to do to keep them from carrying out maybe minor or obviously potentially major attacks. So the funding part of it is key in cybersecurity right now.
Sure, I want to turn this over to the rest of the panel. Talk about what this shutdown means for protecting the country's critical infrastructure, stopping these key threats from places like China and Iran. Tim, you're closest to me, so you get to go first.
No, I do think that there's a significant impact in that our attention is diverted. As Senator Chambliss said, you know, having our attention diverted right now is not the right time to do that. I think, though, for me, we know the threats are out there. We've seen them play out. We saw them play out in the Syria, lead up to where we are with Syria. We've seen them played out across the world. I think for me, the bigger issue, this also keeps us from the debate on where America is going. One of the things that I've been working on in the past year especially is the fact that we have not, as a country, had a doctrine that led the country forward like we did with containment during the Cold War. We haven't replaced that. Where we are today now is in the very early stages of barely getting a debate on what that is. So what we have are a lot of policies, strategies, programs without an overlying framework to allow us to go forward. That's recognized. That's recognized throughout the world. And consequently, there are folks out there, both nation states but also other groups, that are looking for advantages or looking to take advantage of where we are as we try to figure out what our next steps are going forward.
Sure, Chris.
Tony, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. From my perspective, and I think from the tech community perspective, it's one of opportunity cost. There are a lot of challenges we could be tackling right now and we need DC to tackle, such as immigration reform. You know, from the tech perspective, that's essential to ensure that we have the talent necessary to really continue to innovate. And so we have to get these things done. We have to modernize or continue to modernize our education system. And if we're squabbling over relatively insignificant or trying to relitigate old legislative battles, we're not getting to these really, really tough challenges. So from a tech perspective, I would like to see DC move on and start to tackle the really big problems.
Sure, and you worked in the administration as this debate got started, as it started to migrate to the Hill before we saw the big collapse ultimately in the Senate, in 2012. And so the question is, if you were in the White House right now, and the White House is working on this executive order, and you consider the impacts of the shutdown, it does very much seem to be the case that there's no way this first draft of the cybersecurity standards can possibly be done by October 12th. Do you think that's the case?
It's funny, I went online to look at the most recent draft before I came here, and the website was unavailable because of the shutdown. So certainly there's going to be an impact. It sounds to me like NIST has been making great progress in collaboration with industry. So I think they're on glide path to have that done, but clearly there will be an impact in terms of implementation.
Sure, Richard, I want to get to you in a second, but Senator Chambliss, I'm wondering if you can address this issue of opportunity cost that Chris just raised. Is it an issue that, it's hard to address cybersecurity threats and legislate on cybersecurity as we're, quarreling and debating the budget? Can we do these things at the same time, or does one crowd out space from the other?
Well, Chris raises a good point. I mean, we do have major issues that are staring us in the face that have got to be taken care of. And, cybersecurity obviously, in my opinion, heads that list, but cybersecurity has been crowded out by FISA modernization. And immigration has been pushed off. And there are a number of other key issues out there, like the Defense Authorization Bill, that have got to be done. And the clock is ticking, time's running out, and here we are. We're arguing over funding and saying we're going to shut down the government unless we defund Obamacare. And I've been one to say that I just don't think that's possible. And there is no end game there. And I wish we could have gotten together earlier on a CR with maybe some minimal attachments and move to something that is significant like the debt ceiling, because we got to get beyond that to address any number of major issues that once we get to January are going to be harder to deal with. Everybody knows that we get to January, it's an election year, and things tend to fall off the table. So the critical point of time, in my opinion, is between now and the end of the year. One other issue I'll throw in here is I haven't given up on a big deal from the standpoint of fiscal reform. Reduction in spending, reforming entitlements, and major tax reform are all components that we won't solve between now and the end of the year. But I do think there is still an opportunity to put a glide path towards resolving all three of those issues, to deal with the sequester, because if we don't deal with sequester, the IC and the other folks in the Department of Defense are really going to get hit hard next year. And I think it's imperative that we try to work towards some sort of glide path to resolving those.
Sure, Richard, you guys at Mandiant study the threats, what's out there with China and Iran and otherwise. Bring this all together. The government shut down, things aren't working. Are we able to stop and identify the threats?
Well, while the government may be shut down, the good news is the private sector is not. The breaches that you're reading about in the newspaper, Mandiant continues to respond to them. So thankfully, we're not affected. And so you can rest a little easier that a lot of the companies you care about are getting the help that they need. One area, though, that I do worry about with the government shutdown is one of the most effective programs I've seen over the last 8 years or so, and that's been the FBI's external notification program. About 2/3 of the time that a company learns that they've had a serious intrusion, something that's nation state sponsored for the most part, it's because they've been told by the FBI. And to the extent that that program might be interrupted or reduced in any way, that worries me, because that means those companies who can't find on their own that they've been compromised are staying in that state where their intellectual property and their trade secrets are being stolen. So that's one of the reasons why I would like to see this resolved, just to help those companies get back on their feet.
Senator, you mentioned the Defense Authorization Act, and I think if we had a House member sitting up here, they'd make the case of, we passed the NDA months ago, back in June. The Senate still hasn't moved on it. What's the forecast for that measure? When are we likely to see that happen? Will we be working on this Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, late in December, as we did last year?
Yeah, I mean, last year is a pretty good example of why you don't need to do the defense authorization bill at the end of the year. It tends to get crammed in, and you don't have the time for debate on critical issues. I think that was a huge mistake last year, and it looks like we may be headed towards the same thing. That being said, I know Senator Levin is pushing hard. Unfortunately, we got a little setback with Senator Inhofe having some health issues that are probably going to delay us for a short time, but I don't think long time. But it's the next major bill sitting out there. If we're not going to do appropriations, which it doesn't appear we are, then the defense authorization bill ought to be next. But I'm not the majority leader, so unfortunately I don't control that.
And I also wanted to touch again on the budget. You all mentioned sequestration. So the Pentagon already facing a lot of challenges with the budget. They've been asked to tighten their belts. How does cybersecurity get impacted when you have this double whammy of across-the-board budget cuts? And now DNI Director James Clapper has said that 70% of the intelligence community's civilian employees are facing furloughs. How does that impact being able to get things done in this arena?
It's going to have a huge impact. I mean, we've got programs that are going to be impacted. We have critical satellite programs and others that, from an infrastructure standpoint, are going to face more scrutiny than ever as we go through the defense authorization bill. And the people side of it, obviously, is critically important. It's pretty clear that if nothing changes with respect to sequestration, there are going to be major furloughs next year. If we can get through next year, then it becomes a little bit easier to manage, but next year is going to be a very critical year. As I said earlier, trying to think that we would take a step back or a slowdown in cyber, boy, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians are licking their chops thinking that might happen. So hopefully, from the standpoint of furloughs, we'll be able to give the type of flexibility that General Clapper has been asking for that frankly he doesn't have right now to manage this people-wise and otherwise. If we don't do that, then we will certainly get hit harder and be more vulnerable.
The rest of you guys, did you want to weigh in on that as well, or how the furloughs might be impacting?
Sure, I can briefly state that security is mainly a people problem. I mean, even if you have the world's best technology, you need people to run it. There's really no sort of self-defending network, despite what some other companies might believe. It really does come down to people who have eyes on scopes, figuring out what the bad guys are doing, because at the other end of the internet are those intruders. There are, I mean, just, it's tough to come up with unclassified estimates for how big the threat is in terms of the numbers of people out there. With the Mandate report, we estimated that Unit 61398 had upwards of 1,000 people. But just to give you a sense of the scale, Chinese state media announced that they have 2 million people dedicated to censoring the internet. They can throw 2 million people at watching their own population. If they're willing to throw 2 million people at a domestic security problem, you can imagine the scale of the problem that they're throwing at external threats.
I agree with Richard. You know, human capital is a very scarce commodity, especially when it comes to technology. And if we don't treat our capital well, they're going to leave. They're going to be sick of these shenanigans. So we have to do a better job of giving them the same kind of certainty that we would want to give the business community. I think we have to treat our federal workers better, plain and simple.
So, I think, if I can, I think as the longer this goes on, the longer we repeat the mistakes we made right after the Cold War when we decided to go look for a peace dividend. Senator Chambliss and I both lived through part of that when he was on the House Intelligence Committee and I was there, in that we were picking up pieces. I mean, we had gutted our intelligence programs way into the bone, and took us decades to recover from that and a 9/11 attack. It's the same thing here, and the scarier prospect here is that while you look at, and we can talk about China and Russia and everything else, and we should, the other issue here is that this is, if you think about the cyber threat, in many ways, it's an asymmetric threat on steroids, because we're moving not just from nation state to nation state, we're now moving from an era of alliances to accomplices. Take Syria. You don't know who else is going to team up with Syria, with Syrian Electronic Army. undoubtedly there were other sympathizers in Russia and elsewhere who are not officially part of the government, but certainly are willing to go to the cause, right? And some of the individuals that were just talked about in China. So this is in some way a more insidious and a more enhanced threat that at this point we're not taking as seriously as we need to, and sequester kind of proves that.
Sure, we mentioned China, Russia, and Iran. Let's dig into some of these threats now, and I want to start with China, particularly because of all the work that Mandiant has done in identifying some of the ties there. Its seminal report earlier this year. What have you seen at Mandiant since the report has come out? How has the Chinese threat potentially changed since you guys were first able to tie some of the hacking going on there to the Chinese government?
I don't necessarily think that the threat has changed that much. There's certainly other people looking at it now, and there are others who may have doubted initially our findings who are finding themselves that the same issue is happening. There was a report in the media that activity had paused following the publication of our report. That was just an operational, a temporary setback for them. And unfortunately, they continued to attack very quickly thereafter. And it's important to remember that the group that we talked about is just one of approximately 24 groups that we track that are state-affiliated, state-sponsored, and in some cases, state actors. So all that activity has continued unabated. They don't have any of the sort of funding problems that we have. They just continue to appropriate trade secrets and such, despite the best efforts of the administration and others.
Sure, and that's the next question. The administration has engaged or tried to engage on this issue of Chinese cyber threats. We just saw the meeting with the president and his Chinese counterpart out in California. We have this working group that's going on right now to try to address these Chinese cybersecurity threats. To the rest of the panel, Senator Chambliss, you next if you can. Has the White House done enough here? Has Congress done enough here? What do we still need to do to address this Chinese cyber threat head on?
Well, the answer is no and no. I mean, obviously, there's got to be leadership starting from the top on any major issue. And I think by virtue of the fact you've got this kind of crowd here at 8:30 in the morning listening on this issue.
We gave them coffee just so they were
It just tells you that there are a lot of people in this town and otherwise that know that this is the next major military and otherwise issue that we're going to be facing. And the Chinese are a big part of that. The Mandiant report is just indicative of what's happening, obviously, with China, but there are also other state actors out there that are causing lots of problems. And if they had focused on the Iranians or the Russians, for example, they could have written a very nice report there. Which, by the way, the Mandiant report, I was telling Richard earlier, these guys are my heroes, and I talk about them all over the country when I'm talking about cyber issues. And people in America need to understand the seriousness of this. And that's where leadership coming out of the White House and coming out of Congress has failed in the first instance because people are not cognizant of exactly how serious this is from an economic standpoint. There's no blood and guts in a cyber attack, and that makes it harder to really get the message out there. Secondly, I do applaud the president on the executive order. I think that from our standpoint, on our side of the aisle, within the intel community, we think it could have been a lot worse, but it turned out to be a pretty good order. And we are seeing it play out pretty well now with NIST, and that's a critical aspect of it. The thing about it is, though, that even there, the Chinese are watching. The Russians are watching. And they're trying to figure out right now how they're going to get around these standards or how they're going to continue to encroach on us and have the ability to attack us. So I think that is an indication of why Congress has got to act more immediately than what we're reacting to right now. And the president's got to show leadership. He's done that to a certain extent, but he's got to step up his game. But I think it's critically important that Congress step up, particularly on the information sharing side.
Sure, we're going to get into information sharing in the EO in just a moment, but Chris and Tim, I want to bring you guys into this conversation. Talk a little bit about the White House response to China, the congressional response to China, and what, if anything, should be better.
This is something that the president obviously takes very seriously. You know, he said that this is not on the margins of a relationship with China, but this is central to the relationship. And I know he definitely means that. Cyber is one of the issues that keeps him up at night, particularly the threats to our critical infrastructure. And so this is a multi-year effort, though, to develop a norm, an international norm that can distinguish between traditional statecraft and espionage from economic theft. And so it's going to take a long time to build that norm internationally, and there's going to be a lot of bilateral work that needs to be done. But clearly he is willing to assert leadership and make that happen.
Tim?
I think that the steps the administration have taken so far are good steps. They don't go far enough, so I agree with the rest of the panelists. I think the issue here is that there is a broader perspective here that goes beyond this administration's term, and it's very hard for any administration to look past that, but we have to, because this is the future and direction of America. And we talk about the government. I mean, the same goes for the private sector. I mean, there are certain companies in the private sector that are very good at protecting themselves. The vast majority are not, because we're still having, goes to Senator Chambliss's comment about really understanding the threat and how important it is. If you think about it, the internet today is quickly moved. Right now we consider whether we want to admit to it or not, right now today the internet is a utility. I mean, we expect the internet to be there like you'd expect to walk in this room and turn on a light switch. I mean, and when it's not, you look very puzzled and you go, how can that be? But the real critical nature of this is we're moving now past the utility stage, and we're moving toward the internet as our critical infrastructure. When we talk about critical infrastructure today, we talk about certain segments. I would argue the internet is quickly becoming our critical infrastructure because it affects our economy from top down. I mean, look at how many mom and pop shops are now throughout the country who have now gone international with their product with a click of a button, right? So you do that, and then you look at major industries, and you still have debates, necessary debates, at the CEO level when their chief technology officer comes in and says, I got to have this to protect our network, and there's this look, and they look at him and go, really? Because we just spent this amount, right? And they're weighing that with return on investment. It's a hard choice right now, but right now we don't understand how pervasive the threat is going to be, especially economically, and that's going to clean our clock if we're not careful.
I want to ask you guys real briefly to respond also to the character of the cyber threat as it relates to both Iran and Syria. Obviously, those are high on the priority list when you talk about geographic areas that are of concern.
Well, I can speak to those to a certain degree. Iran has been a threat in the intelligence community for a long time. If you take a look at some of the reporting that the National Counterintelligence Executive has produced over the years, you look in the appendices and you see the lists of cases that they've brought. Several reports ago, it wasn't China and Russia that were number one. I counted, Iran was number one. But those were human spies. They were people who were infiltrating facilities and then removing information by hand. These days, though, other countries besides the Russians and the Chinese are figuring out this digital model of theft is great because it's basically free, it's very low risk, and you can get a huge amount of information by doing so. So other countries are figuring this out and they're acting on it. And we're starting to see the Iranians to a certain extent. They're not anywhere near as pervasive as the Chinese or even the Russians, but it seems like they're out there trying to figure out what it's like to operate on somebody else's network without being caught. And that's the first step in a really interesting scenario where they want to learn how to stay in a network for years, as the Russians and the Chinese have learned how to do. The Syrians, they're still in terms of the threat, they're more of a disruptive force. The fact that they are willing to hack and then tell people about it shows that they are at a different level of maturity. They have to be respected because anybody who can cause damage is something you have to worry about on the internet. But in terms of sort of that really dangerous group that can get into a target, cause widespread damage, perhaps without anyone knowing until it's too late, I don't see the Syrians there yet.
Or your thoughts?
Well, obviously I tend to agree with Richard there with respect particularly to Syria. But what we always have to be cognizant of is that you can take a 15-year-old kid with a laptop and he can do a lot of mischief if he knows what the heck he's doing. And we're going to have to continue to be vigilant with respect to obviously the guys that we know about. But there are just simply so many other potential state actors that could cause mischief, that this is going to be a long-term problem. This is something we're going to have to live with for years to come, which goes back to the earlier point we were talking about from a funding standpoint. We can't afford to have an interruption in that stream of funding. We've got to stay ahead of the curve. We've done that in the private sector. That's why we can compete so well with folks around the world, but in the intelligence community, we've always been ahead of the curve. And if we do have an interruption in that funding stream, then it's not going to allow us to have the ability to monitor not just the folks we know about, but those other potential folks out there.
Sure. Just a heads up that there are 2 seats up in front if anybody standing in the back really wants to sit down. And please remember to tweet and send us your questions because we'd love to hear from all of you. But let's turn back now to the executive order and to what's happening on Capitol Hill. You know, Chris, you said couldn't access the latest draft of the draft on this website. Senator Chambliss, you've been somewhat pleased with the process so far. But the one major thing we hear from the administration is that this executive order isn't going to be totally successful without Congress getting involved to sort of fill in the gaps, whether that's on information sharing or whether that's on incentivizing private companies to adopt these voluntary standards that they're putting together along with those at NIST and the rest of the federal government. So I guess the big overarching question on the second part of that is this. Can this executive order work out if Congress isn't providing liability protection, isn't giving companies the carrots, so to speak, to get them to make these changes in their cybersecurity practices? Jump ball.
So let me just say, the cybersecurity executive order was always intended to be a tool that we could use to develop a market standard of care. Right now, cybersecurity is a very immature market, especially with respect to critical infrastructure protection. So we needed to do something. Clearly, we weren't able to get legislative action toward that end. So the executive order reflected all of the authorities that the president had at his disposal. So he's now maximized those. I think that probably gets us to the 10-yard line, but probably not all the way to the end zone. So there definitely will need to be more that's done, because you need to be able to create the standard of care which requires widespread adoption. Clearly, this is an issue that companies are beginning to take more seriously, but we need to ensure that the lights are going to be on when we need them, that hospitals have power when we need them. So there are very difficult questions about how many of our citizens need to be covered to make sure that they've got power and critical resources. And then, I think ultimately we're going to have to do more, and that may include, as the House Republican Task Force pointed out, limited and targeted regulation eventually. So I think the framework is a good starting point, but by no means is it the end state. We're going to need to do a lot more.
Sure. Others want to weigh in?
Yeah, could I comment briefly? The framework to me, using the football analogy, which is great, everyone at Mandiant gets a football helmet after 1 year because our CEO is a quarterback. The football analogy is great because the framework is like everyone agreeing that they're going to play the same game and putting your pads on. But it doesn't tell you what the score of the game is. So even if we get full adoption of the framework, everyone believes it's great, everyone's doing that sort of work, there's no guarantee that it's going to stop bad guys from getting into your network and stealing your data. We need someone to be taking the score of the game and telling you whether or not what you're doing is effective. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned the FBI's program earlier. And that's what the FBI finds is based on other authorities. So that ability to say, look, you've put a program together, but there are still guys inside your network and you need some help, that's what's really key. And that, to me, would be the next step at some point, is to say, what is the state of your network? Not just, do you have your pads on, you're ready to play.
Sure, but one of the big issues here has been information sharing. The White House has said that while it's done what it can to push information out to the private sector, that it's definitely not to the extent that Congress wanted to give the private sector and the government the ability to exchange threat data. Senator Chambliss, give us an update on where we are. You and Chairwoman Feinstein have been working on legislation for quite some time. Give us a status report.
Well, first of all, we learned a lesson after 9/11. The lesson is that if you don't have total free moving sharing of information between law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, then we're not going to be able to protect ourselves from attack, whether it be an attack like 9/11 or in the case of what we're talking about now, a cyber attack. So I think that's very important. And here's the way I look at this. From a public-private sector standpoint, I think the EO really moves us in the right direction from a mindset standpoint. But we've got to go way beyond that from a congressional standpoint. And if we don't incentivize the private sector to get involved, then we have totally failed. And the way we're going to have to incentivize the private sector is doing two things. Number one, we've got to prove to them that the federal government does have the capability of providing them the kind of information that they need to protect themselves, and that they can feel comfortable in communicating with the federal government and different agencies within the government about some of their personal business, so to speak. Secondly, we've got to provide total liability protection. Now, I don't care whether it's information that is shared directly between a financial institution, and today they have a relationship with the FBI or maybe the SEC or some government agency. There is no liability protection, but we've got to give it to them from that standpoint. And secondly, just from an overall standpoint of sharing information between the private sector as well as private sector and the federal government. Diane and I both approach cyber legislation from that perspective. We've had some disagreements on how we get there, but we're very close to having a cybersecurity bill. Had we not been interrupted by the NSA and revelations by Mr. Snowden and the need for FISA reform, I think we probably would have been there because that was next on our plate. But we still have a couple of issues left with respect to liability. But I think generally speaking, here's how we envision it working. There will be a portal located at probably at DHS, and cyber information will go into that portal and be shared in real time. And I emphasize real time, because that is the key. If we say it's going to be shared in as close to real time as possible, then we're behind the curve. It's got to be shared in real time. And once we get to that point, then the issue becomes purely a matter of what's going to happen from a countermeasure standpoint, who's going to dictate what kind of countermeasures are implemented, and then when does the liability kick in. We're pretty close to agreeing on that, but we're not quite there yet.
Sure. You know, when you mention countermeasures and liability protection, it really does tie into the Snowden saga here, because here we're talking about the government potentially telling a private company, here's a certain set of actions you can and can't take in response to a threat. If the company presumably makes a mistake, they'd be shielded from any sort of lawsuit because they were acting as an agent of the government, I suppose. It's just like the general sort of framework here. Do we need to rethink that machination, though, in light of everything that's happened to Snowden? Does there need to be more transparency, or do we need to rethink the totality of information sharing as a result of these revelations?
Well, certainly there needs to be more transparency, and that's a whole different issue with respect to cyber versus FISA reform. You know, you can't have protection from a cybersecurity standpoint without the NSA being integrally involved. I mean, they're the experts. And unfortunately, there's a distrust out there of the federal government, period, when it comes to privacy matters. We've got to restore that trust somehow. And we start by restoring the trust between the private sector, the business community, and agencies of the federal government that they deal with today, but are going to have to deal with in a more formal manner with cybersecurity. And if we can develop that trust between the private sector and the federal government, then I think it will bleed down to the general citizenry out there. and that's critical.
I think it's important to realize that the type of information we're talking about sharing is not American personal information. The privacy community, which I love, has been very vocal about this, but they don't understand the type of information that's going to be shared. You want to see the type of information that would be shared that is helpful to help companies and individuals defend themselves, read the mandate report. You will not find anyone's social security number, name, address, date of birth, browsing habits. There's none of that. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about technical indicators that show how bad guys are breaking into networks and how you can stop them. And I don't see why that type of information should be held up by well-meaning privacy advocates, but advocates who I think are not paying attention to the type of information that needs to be shared.
Chris, you had a thought?
So a couple points. Senator, I was pleased to hear you endorse the civilian portal, because I think that's critically important. The IC and the military have no place in domestic security. And to Richard's point, I completely agree. There's no reason why businesses can't minimize this data. So that's a perfectly reasonable provision to include.
But that's been a huge debate in the House. That minimization language in the eyes of some privacy advocates never really materialized the way they wanted.
But it's trivial to architect into a system from the beginning. So again, businesses need certainty and clarity. If you provide that, they'll be fine with it. So the expectation needs to be, and this, frankly, there's a business case for this, as we're seeing with our cloud providers right now who are disadvantaged because of the NSA disclosures. We need to ensure that there's transparency and that companies are required to minimize to a reasonable degree. And then secondly, there's also an efficacy issue here. And that is, the real issue is not what can the government do for the private sector. The government is not going to solve this problem. What we need to do is give businesses clarity so that they can exchange information among the business community. Frankly, the signatures that the government is sending out are marginally effective. The true value is in businesses being able to aggregate and share information in real time. I would love to just see, frankly, I think it's probably a bridge too far to have new liability protection for data to come back to the government. I think, frankly, the government probably has enough access to data as it is. I would love to just see a little bit more clarity so that we can facilitate more business-to-business information sharing. I think if we go too far on liability, we will create a moral hazard, and then that will put people at risk. We don't want to immunize negligence, because then the American taxpayer is on the hook to pay for that.
Sure, we're running short on time, but want to get a quick pulse check on the panel. Can information sharing legislation still happen this year? Yes or no? Are we out of time? One no.
Yes.
Senator Chambliss, you think so?
Yes.
One optimistic vote.
And you'll hear Mike Rogers and Dutch Ruppersberger talk about it today, later on. The four of us, Dutch and Mike and Diane and I, have been working very closely on this for a year now. So if we can get something done on the Senate side, we think we can come together and bridge our differences and the philosophy between the House bill and where we're going to go.
Sure.
And I hope that's true. But I want to go back to something Chris said very, very quickly, and that is, we have to remember that even with that legislation, information sharing is not a panacea, right? I mean, you go back after 9/11, you had a lot of local law enforcement officials who came to the government, came to the intelligence community, and basically it was, if I only had a top secret clearance, everything would now be revealed and I would understand the complete terrorist threat. And some of them got those clearances, and they were sorely disappointed, because there are no absolutes. It is sharing a certain level of information that gives you an advantage in some of the threat vectors and things like that. But if you think, and I think a lot of people believe this, if you think that's going to solve everything and say, well, I can clearly identify this person on this day and they're coming at me, we're in for a big shock.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up and leave it here on this conversation. Senator Chambliss, Richard, Tim, and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated getting to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are coming this way.
All right.
All right, before we start our next conversation, I just want to remind everyone to keep your questions coming on Twitter to the hashtag Cyber7. We're hoping to wrap those into some of our later conversations. Now joining me on stage, we have Trey Hodgkins, Jay Kaplan, Tom Kellerman, and Tara Maller. So we're hoping this conversation can focus on how we secure the next generation of cyber talent and what the biggest innovations are in the industry. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again. I wanted to start out, as we did on the last panel, it's hard to have these conversations without talking about the current budget impasse Washington seems to find itself in. And I'm curious, with the current government shutdown compounded by sequestration, obviously the Pentagon getting disproportionately hit there, how is the budget situation impacting the ability to recruit and retain qualified talent? And Tara, since you're sitting closest to me, I'm going to go ahead and start with you here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not really on the recruiting side, but in terms of the government shutdown, I mean, we've seen hundreds of thousands of civilian employees not going to work. We've seen in the intelligence community in the thousands of employees at home. We've also seen, the Department of Homeland Security have a major deficit in terms of being able to recruit people with the technical expertise. So, I find it hard to believe that this wouldn't have an impact, both in terms of shifting people's perceptions and losing the potential talent pool of people who are interested in these jobs, and also making it harder to devote resources to getting the types of people with the expertise. And not just on the technical side. I think a lot of the focus has been on the technical side, but also on the policy side of cyber, which is an area I really think there needs to be more focus on. I'm not a technical cybersecurity person. I've sort of taken other areas and applied it to cyber, like work on sanctions or work on diplomacy. And I think one of the areas we're missing people in the government is more on the cyber diplomacy side, the policy side of the equation, not just on the sort of, back end computer science and technical expertise.
So in a word, it's terrible. If you were a college graduate or someone thinking of graduating, put another way, why would you want to come work for the government? You're disparaged by elected officials about the value you bring to the government. The workforce you are in doesn't have any realistic prospects of salary growth or for that matter, in some areas, career growth. And occasionally the government may shut down and you face the risk of not being paid. So, it's not a very attractive way to get the right talent. Probably most of the people who have the skills we're talking about were deemed essential, and they may be working. But, they're still facing the challenges that the other components of the government are not there that they need to continue to be successful. And then, if you're in the industry, this is even a challenge, because even if you're deemed essential on the industry side and your contracts or you're still performing on your contracts, you have the same challenges as your government customer may not be there. Or the elements of your contract where you submit your invoices and get paid, those personnel are not there. So it creates significant challenges around the board for the customer and the contractors.
Going down the line here.
Well, given that 75% of Cyber Command and CIAIOC right now isn't working, we have a serious problem. The people that are watching the walls are no longer there. This is compounded with the reality that we already had a skeleton crew. We were already playing with a quasi-B team because the best hackers in the world don't join the government. They either go private sector or they go underground. What's most worrisome now is the fact that the attacks that have been leveraged, and granted there's a major attack every 5 minutes, they're just burrowing deep inside of us. They're not knocking things down, they're not destroying networks, and that's why we're not talking about them. But the real problem will be when these people come back to work and realize that half of their systems may or may not be compromised.
Certainly a scary forecast.
I mean, the only thing I can really add is, I spent several years in the National Security Agency, and I see a lot of my friends and fellow colleagues not working at the moment, and I find it pretty unbelievable that they have been susceptible to the furloughs. I think they're back in work starting this week, but they're really playing critical roles defending our nation and in the intelligence space, and it's really an unfortunate thing.
So you said the best hackers in the world either go private or they go underground. And I want to stick with that underground sector. How do you, if you're a company or the government and you're looking to recruit and get the best talent that's out there, how do you reach those people and how do you incentivize for them and make the case that they should work for you instead of stay out on their own?
Well, the U.S. has a culture of bastardizing the hacker community as a whole. Other countries actually treat prolific hackers as almost like athletes. In China, for example, in the provinces, you compete in hacking competitions, and then the government sets you up for life if you're good at what you do. In Russia, you're treated as a national asset, or you're allowed to operate under the blessing of the regime so long as you don't hack anything of national importance. We didn't do that here, and I don't think that culturally is going to change here. But the reality is because we're a society based on capitalism and individualism, if you're technically sophisticated and you know how to become omniscient, why would you want a boss? So, I mean, how do you change that cultural paradigm in and of itself? And if you're actually prolific and you get a great job at the NSA for 6 years, and then all of a sudden one of the major SIs or major Silicon Valley companies is offering you triple your salary with no boss, why wouldn't you join them? So I don't know if there are answers to those questions, rather than I think at the elementary school level, we need to incentivize kids that doing cybersecurity is as cool as being a professional athlete or a singer or something else. But I think it has to, culturally, we have to change that.
And can I just add to that? So we heard the number earlier. I was watching from the back about the 2 million, Chinese monitors for internal domestic surveillance. We have a people labor problem as well, and we're not tapping from all parts of the population because we don't have enough people going into the STEM fields that feed into hacker communities and the technical side. Similarly, on the policy side, we also don't have enough people specializing in cybersecurity. Particularly, if you look at the numbers, security community in general, hovering around 30 to 40% in senior level positions on the women front. In cyber, it's a lot worse because you have less women in these fields. So you're not even tapping from 50% of the population. So you're going to have a numbers problem down the line, especially when you're trying to compete with places like China, which just in terms of the amount of people. So I really think, aside from shifting the sort of paradigm around going from Silicon Valley, to national security jobs, you need to also look at a sort of cultural paradigm shift and making these types of professions appealing to a broader segment of the population, because right now they're just not. So that starts early with very basic things in science and math education, and then later on as well, tapping people from other areas of the intelligence community, the national security community, people that might not have the particular skill set, and that's a problem too. The job postings through the government tend to be very specific in the type of criteria that filters out certain people. But you're not going to be able to fill those jobs unless you sort of broaden the skill sets that might have applicability from other areas of the community. So that's something I'd suggest as well.
Others of you guys want to weigh in on that one?
She's right.
Okay, well, I'm going to challenge you on that. You mentioned the gender gap, kind of. How do you make that smaller, more narrow?
That's the billion-dollar question. I mean, there's lots of issues from education and getting younger girls interested in math and science at an early age. There are startups focused on doing this through toys. I think there's some engineering toy company, Goldie Blocks now, which is targeting girls in engineering games. There's books and media are a huge aspect of this. I know everyone sort of shies away from using like entertainment or celebrity arguments like Homeland to get people interested in security, but it actually has a really big effect. Shows like LA Law increase law school enrollment, things like that actually do increase people's interest in the intelligence community. As a child, I remember reading books that focused on detectives and work that isn't exactly what I do now, but sparked an early interest. So I think that stuff's important. And then making an extra effort to recruit people from those communities if and when there are openings available.
One thing I wanted to touch on as we're talking about the cultural ramifications here is what it's like to recruit and retain a workforce in kind of the post-Snowden era. And if I could get each of you guys to respond to that, and we'll start down at the end of the line since I started with Tara the last couple times.
So my company, we actually recruit a global community of security experts and incentivize them in the form of bounties to discover vulnerabilities in enterprise applications. The company's called Synac. And so we're looking at this more of a global problem where people who are really good in this space are obviously not just in the United States. And the question really is, how can we leverage people globally for the benefit of the US, whether that's large enterprise or the government? And what we're seeing is a large number of the real talent is in countries like Russia and China and Eastern Europe, and that's what we're ultimately trying to tap into right now. So
I think the mission is off. If this was just an issue of national security, we could create international norms to solve this problem, but we can't. It's a multiplicity of actors. It's a free fire zone. Interpol noted recently, and Trend Micro is Interpol's security partner, full disclosure, that there's a 10% decrease in street crime last year. Is that because more people are going to church? No. It's because criminals are using technology now to leverage criminality. That being said, I think the focus should be on a global effort and a global recruitment supply chain for human capital related to at least thwarting the acts of criminality. If we can get rid of the multiplicity of actors, the gray area, or the swamp, as Melissa Hathaway used to point to, then we can begin the real true nation state to nation state engagement as it relates to cyber. So that being said, I have 1,200 threat researchers that work for me. They speak 46 different languages. Yes, there's a vetting process, but the same token being said, I think that our mission sync needs to change towards dealing with the criminality, because the FBI is overwhelmed with caseload. They only prosecute less than 1% of computer intrusions successfully, and it's not their fault. They're just overwhelmed.
So another area that I think we can work on is that our government isn't really engaged in these international conversations, and we feel like they can be a leader, and they haven't done that. You know, there's also the opportunity that's coming up in the transatlantic discussions. We're formulating those. I think that the conversations occurred last week, even though we were shut down. I can't recall. But part of that conversation, for example, is around cross-border data flow. And that one piece of the conversation is an important role that the international conversation needs to occur on, but we can play a leading role, and we're not doing that. So that's another place, another facet where our government can step up. We can have these international engagements that we need to be having and be more effective across the board.
And I agree with most of what was just said. One other caveat I'd add is when we speak of cybersecurity, it seems like it's lumping a lot of different things together, and I think that actually undermines progress in lots of areas. So what is cybersecurity? You can look at it based on the target, you can look at it based on the perpetrator, but it involves, you know, everything ranging from economic espionage from the Chinese going into, you know, computers and stealing information, very different from a potential kinetic attack on a nuclear facility or an energy facility, very different from cyber hackers, very different from attacking, you know, banking websites like we've seen denial of service. So these are all very different things, and I almost say it would be the equivalent of in, you know, the regular realm of violence, grouping everything together from interstate war to terrorism to insurgency to criminal street gang activity. It wouldn't make any sense. But when we talk about cybersecurity, and probably the mix of people in this room tap from all those areas. So I think that actually makes it really confusing, and that's probably one of the things that as we go forward, we need to sort of work on segregating those areas a bit more to work on policy solutions, you know, internationally and domestically on these issues.
I would also like to add to that. When we think of cybersecurity and cybersecurity professionals, you assume they have to be a hardcore coder. Yes, you need hardcore coders. You also need really good system administrators. You also need really good application testers. You need all sorts of different multidisciplinary fields. Analysts, you need people that understand the foreign policy dynamic as well as the cyber context. The same is said for the underground economy. You know, there's been a dramatic evolution of capability both on the defensive security tools and platform side as well as the offensive. So you no longer need to be a true sophisticant to either be a black hat or a white hat in this space. You just need to be appreciative of how these things fit together and what the nuance is, and be a risk manager inherently in what you do. So I think that we could broaden the aperture of who can actually join us in this fight, especially as it relates to the different types of roles that exist out there that aren't just hardcore coder, hardcore geek, you know?
Jay, I'm going to pick on you for a second. So you worked in the NSA, you left and struck out on your own. Kind of talk about your decision making there and whether or not you think that more people will start doing that, or if this trend will kind of slowly decrease. It seems like we've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you see a lot of innovation happening inside of the federal government. You have really, really talented, smart people there. And the fundamental question is, how do you retain them there? The government's not able to pay the salaries that the large companies can pay in Silicon Valley. The prospects starting your own company are pretty amazing, and the opportunity to leave my job, while it was a really phenomenal position, you know, serving the country, it was just something that I personally felt was a better opportunity for me. So I think it comes down to the government, you know, paying the same salaries as the enterprise workforce, and at the same time incentivizing in other ways to retain the talent once they come on board.
I would also say I think the government needs to pay more respect to its cybersecurity professionals, that they're still being marginalized under the policymakers. They're still being marginalized below the folks that focus on kinetic security. At least bring them up to the same level of importance as the folks who deal with physical security or facilities security. And also there's a governance problem throughout the government and throughout the private sector where you have chief information security officers reporting to CIOs. That's like having your defensive coordinators report to your offensive coordinators. The offensive coordinator is going to go for it on 4th and 1 every time. And so they're exacerbating the job and the role of the CISO. And when the CISO says, don't go forward with that mobile-based portal for access to our sensitive data, the CIO is going to always say no. So then you just deal with this chicken or egg phenomenon. So I say just from an empowerment perspective, at a minimum, if he would have been more empowered, and I obviously don't know the nuance, but if you would have been more respected or empowered internally to the organization and treated at the same level as those other folks, maybe for the chance of God, he might have stayed.
Thoughts from you guys on this end?
You know, I just point again at the current situation. It would have to make someone working at NSA who was contemplating leaving, it would have to help make that decision easier. And so, you know, they're both on point with we have to understand the workforce we need, we have to respect them, pay them appropriately and effectively and competitively. But, you know, we have to create an environment in the government. The persistent federal fiscal uncertainty is a challenge to these broader goals that we're talking about this morning. And those issues complicate solutions, and they are part of the problem in finding the solutions that we're talking about.
If you all could name one thing that Washington could do to make it easier to recruit cyber talent, or more generally speaking, what should Washington be doing now that it's not?
Start earlier.
Yeah.
I think they need to start at the high school level. I think there's a lot of great university programs out there. NSA, Centers of Academic Excellence, Information Assurance Scholarship Program, NSF Scholarship for Service Program, but what happens before that, I think the government really needs to start targeting talent a lot earlier in the process.
I think the SANS has done a good job with the Cyber Challenge, but allowing the Cyber Challenge to be the focus for recruitment of professionals at an early stage, and professionals that don't necessarily have to work for the DoD. Why can't they dedicate 6 years of service for a full ride to a civilian agency and do cyber? Why does it have to be the DoD? You know, some kids grow up, maybe not respecting the DoD, but respecting some other civilian government agency. Why can't they dedicate their time there?
There's a couple of things the government can do. I agree that the focus on STEM is critical, and it's woefully inadequate today. Another area I learned yesterday from one of my colleagues that all the folks that are sitting in line waiting to get their H-1B visas for FY14 have a 10-day window to have that process completed, and apparently the clock is at day 8. And because of this administrative challenge, those folks, those talented people who are here to go to work in these kinds of areas, may be lost to us. We may not get them for FY14. At least there'll be a delay. And the other area that I think that we need to focus on is encouraging. I mentioned on STEM. There have been a number of studies about why people don't pursue STEM educations. One of the findings was that parents themselves are one of the discouragers because, we don't have that the pursuit of engineering and mathematics and technology that we had in the days of Apollo and the science and space programs, and we need to try and find a way to light that spark in the people even below high school to younger kids, make them interested. There are things that we can, there are television shows, there are cultural things they can be exposed to, but we have to emphasize that in a way that we're not doing today.
I'll add 2 more to the list. One would be more collaborations with both the think tank and academic community. A good example of this, there's the acronym is ECIR. I think it's Exploration in Cyber International Relations. It's MIT, Political Science Department, Belfer Center at the Kennedy School Collaborative, funded via Minerva. It's one of the few programs I know that really pulls together people from the academic community, the think tank world, and it's funded through government money, and its focus is explicitly on cyber, and its focus on the technical side of the equation, but also has lots of people looking at policy issues as well. So that's one thing. And also, I don't have the sort of magic way to fix it, but usajobs.gov, some sort of overhaul to that application process, which probably would take some work, but I mean, just the way that it works in general, I think is actually not conducive to getting people into the system quickly and the right people into the position quickly because of the way it sets up requirements for certain jobs, the questions that it asks, Washington Post yesterday, women won't apply for jobs unless, men will apply for jobs when they think they have 60% of the skills that match, and women won't apply unless they think they have all of them. And on the USA Jobs, it actually asks you to sort of self-assess yourself on if you have certain qualities that match certain jobs. So I think that process alone, just based on the studies of how people self-evaluate, it's just objectively true that there are differences. So we're actually limiting people and filtering it out because of this sort of differentiation between self-assessments.
I want to ask you guys what you think is next for the industry. What innovations are you seeing that you find particularly encouraging over the last couple months, maybe?
For the underground or for the good guys?
Either one.
Well, from the underground, it's all about man-in-the-browser attacks, because if they can compromise the browser, they can compromise whatever network you have sitting on one end or the mobile device on the other. That's if you could secure the mobile device to begin with. The good guy side, I think, not just advances in testing and the assurance capabilities, but things like advanced threat detection protection that correlates an event that happened in your network to the outside world. You can't rely on the U.S. government to provide you with the adequate intelligence that you need to understand what you should be expecting next. So how can you make those predictions? How can you be more predictive?
Jay?
Wow, there's a lot of solutions coming out to market right now. I think people is always a fundamental challenge. Making sure that they don't open up spear phishing emails, very, very targeted attacks. When you look at advanced persistent threat, it generally starts with some sort of spam, piece of spam. There's a lot of technology coming out today that I think helps automate the protection of those types of threats, and I think that's something that enterprise and government should really be looking at right now.
I think, again, looking at the government, the experience there is that they're so far behind the rest of the world, the commercial world, I should say, and even things that you and I would do on a normal basis, perhaps on our personal computers. I think some areas, there are pockets in the government that they're not even doing those things. So enhancing the roles of the CISOs is one way to do it, and being better coordinated in things like acquisitions, and being more uniform in activities so that you can adequately manage at an enterprise level rather than the way the government buys today, which is very siloed.
Stick with you for a second. On the acquisitions process, do you think it's working as well as it should? And if not, what needs to be changed?
The people that I work with, my leadership, have concluded that what we have today can't be fixed. It's reached the point now where it is so disparate and so piecemeal that we need to do a wholesale evaluation of the process and re-examine in the way that we did in the mid-90s. And that was a period of time when the government realized it could no longer build the custom hammer. You all probably have heard those stories. And it opened itself up to commercial items and concluded that, hey, the government doesn't have to spend all the R&D dollars. There's a lot of that going on in the commercial space. If somebody's making a hammer commercially, let's go buy that one rather than reinvent one ourselves. And we saw a transformation in what the government buys and how it uses it at that time. And we need to go back to some of those tenets, and we also need to look at the actual process. It's extremely cumbersome. It's challenged in a workforce way that many of the other issues that we've talked about this morning are challenged. The people who have the skills are retiring, and things like the current situation help make those decisions for them. The people that are there, they do a great job, but many of them don't have many years of experience. And when you're talking about buying multi-billion-dollar activities or transacting in that way for the government, it takes some experience, it takes some knowledge, and a lot of that is leaving. So a wholesale review of the process is where we are.
Tara, can you speak a little bit about the innovations and specifically the policy side, maybe not necessarily the technical aspects?
Sure. I guess I was going to try to wrap up with a few positive comments rather than things that the government could be doing better. But on the positive side, I agree that we could do a better job making cybersecurity professionals, raised to the caliber or perceived to be at the caliber of other areas. But on the positive side of the equation, I mean, cybersecurity was sort of listed as the #1 issue by James Clapper in his testimony in March, sort of raising it. Unfortunately, bad news also raised the profile of cybersecurity with the release of the Mandiant report and the summit that President Obama had out in California. So these are positive things in terms of, I guess, increasing, you can call it media coverage, but even if the media coverage is on the attack side, I think it's just increasing awareness of the cybersecurity arena and realm. So that's one thing. The other encouraging thing I would say is that despite all of the reports, the Mandiant reports, and the serious nature of everything going on, in terms of interstate hacking, coming out of China, I was in China last month in August for a conference on foreign policy cooperation, part of it being on cyber. And at least and I know this is just in a informal academic think tank sponsored setting, but it was a pretty cordial diplomatic tone to the conference and a pretty frank exchange of ideas, both in terms of presenting policy papers. I presented one on cyber diplomacy and ways we can, work together on certain issues like the hotline that was just established with Russia and just simple tools and the working group and things like that. So again, as with everything in international relations, from Iran to Syria to cyber, rhetoric is only good once you trust and verify and go forward, but it's always positive to have the rhetoric developing first, and we have seen that in terms of some of the strategic dialogues and exchanges that have been set up, but obviously more needs to be done.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the partnerships between Washington and Silicon Valley? Jay, I think this is kind of a natural question for you, and how that partnership's working and what kind of relationship building is going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's an easy avenue to get a Silicon Valley company in front of the right people in Washington. I mean, there's so many different agencies and people at a high level who look at new companies and how the government can make use of them. And I think it's certainly challenging. Having connections into the government certainly helps, but for new companies who don't have those connections, there's not like a centralized place. You have a new product, you have a new service that can really help the government, and you go there. And I think that could be something that could be quite interesting if that could be established.
I think other people address the topic of kind of the public-private partnerships.
So I have 1,200 researchers that see things, and I want to share this information with the government, but because of the lack of proactive behavior on the Hill vis-a-vis passing some information sharing bill, I can only share limited data. It's not about marketing. It's not about metadata. It's really just about who are the organizations or individuals attacking who, and really what is occurring during those attacks. It's impossible without the information sharing bill. Now, everyone knows the whole rub on that is because it's about ownership and authorship, about which side gets to take claim for that. I highly recommend that we get off our hands and pass that, because I have literally 7.2 terabytes of threat data every day that I could share, but I'm unable to do so because of legal realities.
So I was going to say that, the partnerships are critical because at least in the ICT sector, so much of the infrastructure is owned privately. And the government's going to have to work with those companies to understand the kinds of things they're seeing on their networks and have the ability to create the legal frameworks that people need to share that information so we can coordinate. There is also a piece of legislation that was introduced right before the shutdown started that looks to incubate new advancements in technology and other areas in this sort of a startup nature and bring those things forward to the commercial world. So there are some positive movements that would try and incubate those things, looking at partnered R&D between universities and the government, things like that, and then bring the capabilities that those research labs perhaps were producing and commercializing those. And that it's structured in a way for small startups to be able to capture those technologies and bring them to market.
How easy is it to break into the market if you are a small startup and you're going up against these other new emerging startups? You have obviously the big behemoth that is Washington hanging over you as well.
It's not easy, and especially given the sheer number of startups out there today, it's hard to get out. It's hard to get out there and get your name known. I think having the connections help. Having the right investors help. But if you're just a little guy with an amazing solution, it's really difficult to get your name in front of everything else that's out there. It's a very crowded space right now.
I want to turn back to the question of talent again, because that seems to be at the root of all of these discussions. What would you say that we're doing right in terms of recruiting and retaining talent? We've kind of talked about everything that we're doing wrong and that we're not doing and the people we're not reaching.
You know, look, we have an amazing mission. You know, the NSA has an amazing mission. CIA has an amazing mission. All the other federal agencies who are protecting our critical infrastructure have really, really exciting opportunities. And I think just highlighting those to the people who currently work for them will cause the network effect. I mean, you know, I think nothing's more powerful than internal referrals, and if you have really top caliber talent sitting within your federal agencies, you need to leverage those guys to bring more people in, and you need to make them happy and listen to what they're saying to ensure that you can retain them. So.
Well, here's an example within Secret Service. Secret Service has a lot of great investigators. So you have a really talented cyber investigator for Secret Service that's all of a sudden being told, oh yeah, you got to go on protective detail now for a year. Well, you're going to take this one person, and you don't have that many of them, off of what they're focused on to do their traditional mission. Well, why not change some missions? I mean, basically at FBI and Secret Service, there's a lot of very talented people who get distracted or forcibly distracted through their traditional roles, but they've obviously demonstrated capabilities that go beyond the role that they were originally hired for. So I think opening up the flexibility in certain agencies will be important.
Something that we've supported for some time now and certainly could be made more robust is the ability for government personnel to come and work in industry as, you know, call it an internship, call it what you fellowship, and for industry folks to go into government and to share ideas and to share experiences and to begin to understand the challenges that both of them face. You know, for example, we find that a lot of people who work in government don't understand the business drivers out there and why companies behave the way they do. And so just exposure to those kinds of simple basics helps better understand what is motivating both sides and helps people understand what each mission activities are and how each can help each other succeed. So better visibility, better, you know, open up that aperture. Programs today that exist and that are authorized, unfortunately, we're talking about perhaps dozens of people that have taken advantage of that, and we need something that we can scale up so that the best from Silicon Valley, for example, can be sent and spend 6 months working in these agencies where they have incredible missions and they have great challenges that people would love to tackle, but because of the hurdles we've created, we can't do that effectively.
Yeah, just to echo that sentiment, I mean, we live in a world that's quite interdisciplinary, interconnected, and interdependent. And when you look at job postings for jobs, they're quite siloed, and we don't actually try to hire based on knowledge across these places. We tend to have job listings that are very focused. And I mean, I haven't done recruiting for cybersecurity jobs, but I did work at a startup for a while and hire students right out of college. And one of the things that I think startups do really well, and I mean, you might be able to speak to this out in California, I was in New York, is they tend to hire for talent, not necessarily particular job descriptions. In fact, in many times, they don't even necessarily have a job description. They just sort of send you to a career fair, and you're supposed to, you know, find smart and interested people in the mission of your startup, and you figure they're going to be able to learn, pending that they have, you know, assuming they have some applicable skill set. That smart people, obviously this is not true on, you know, technical computer science knowledge where you'd obviously need the specifics, but in lots of roles on the cyber side and the policy community, you can tap people from other backgrounds that you might not think of as being traditionally cyber centric. So that would be one way. And the other, I mean, I think that's a great idea in terms of some sort of, you know, rotational program across different places as well.
You know, we would go so far as to say it's a requirement in the career path, for particularly you can establish it that way for someone in the government. You know, and certainly look at having it as a requirement in the career path for someone on the business side, industry side.
And just as one other point on that, it's a personal anecdote. So right after 9/11, I was in college and I was an American politics focused government major with no interest in security, but thought it might be a good idea. after 9/11 to take some courses on it. So I returned to college. It was probably October 2001, and I decided to do an internship at the Dartmouth Institute for Security and Technology Studies with no background in anything related. And the first project he handed to me was doing research on cyber terrorism and cybercrime, and I had no idea what that was. But maybe if that had never happened, I might not even be here on this panel today. So if he had said, oh, but you don't have a technical background, or you are an American politics major. So just things like that, and that's just a personal anecdote. I mean, very small things can open up very big windows or doors or whatever the right expression would be.
I think Tara brings up a good point, though. I mean, I don't think anyone in college has the background, I am a cyber guy, I know cyber, you know? You don't get that experience unless you're working in the space. So I think there needs to be a focus on just looking for the really smart computer scientists, the people who are highly technical and are interested in the security space, and then teaching them, you know, the skills that they need. And I think the government's doing a pretty good job at that. They're recruiting the right talent, they're bringing them in, and then they're putting them through the right coursework to bring them up to the skill level that they need them to be at to accomplish the mission.
All right, guys, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I'm going to have you go off this way, and we'll move into our next topic. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you guys for sticking around with us. For the next panel, I'll be joined by Representatives Adam Schiff and Representative Mac Thornberry, and we're going to have a discussion on whether or not the Pentagon is ready for the cyber battlefield. So first of all, I just want to kind of get the take from each of you as to what the status is from you, Congressman Thornberry, of work on legislation that would help the Pentagon best impact cyber actors, and from you, Representative Schiff, on the kind of the tensions between finding that national security mission and privacy concern. So Representative Thornberry, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's still a work in progress. And if you, I step back and start with the Constitution, where it's not only Congress's responsibility to declare war, but regulate the land and naval forces, raise armies and navies, and so forth. And so if you think about how you fit that constitutional framework into a domain that moves at the speed of light, where attribution is sometimes challenging, putting all those pieces together is difficult. So on armed services, we've been trying to ask this question: what do we expect the military to do to defend us in cyberspace? Now, some of that may be legislation. A lot of it, I think, is the arrangements or the process. For example, last year, we included in the Defense Authorization Bill a quarterly requirement for the military to come, or Cyber Command actually, to come and brief us quarterly on major cyber operations as a way of exercising the oversight that we have to exercise. And so I think with cyber in particular, it is these process issues that is a lot of working our way through how we can defend the country in that domain that is unlike any other.
And what are you seeing so far from those quarterly reports?
A lot of the same things that one sees in the newspaper. A lot of activity, of course, coming from China and other countries we know. But there are some things happening in cyberspace that don't make the newspapers. And so part of what we're trying to do is keep a track on the threats, but also on our capability to deal with the threats. And are we standing up the kind of capability, including the people, the technology that we need? But to me, the biggest gap is not the people or the technology, it's the laws and policies that enable us to engage in this domain. I think that's the biggest gap that remains, and so that's a lot of what
what we're trying to close through hearings, through these process arrangements, and legislation when needed.
Congressman, you talk about some of the tension. You hear a lot about these threats, but obviously, as the debate over the NSA has shown, there's a very big, real concern among the American public when it comes to civil liberties and privacy and making sure that those things are protected.
Well, absolutely, and we have an enormous challenge on our hands that's been made more difficult, more complicated by the Snowden disclosures. On the front end, I think it's quite apparent to all the members of Congress that we have a major challenge on our hands in terms of the potential cyber attack, the ongoing cyber espionage that is attacking not only our infrastructure, potentially our Defense Department, but also civilian private contractors stealing billions of dollars worth of intellectual property. So the threat, I think, is recognized very much across the board in Congress. The response to it started out in the form, at least from the Intelligence Committee perspective, with legislation like CISPA. And there were a number of issues that we were not able to resolve when the bill was initially taken up. I think there are predominantly 4 areas that we were wrestling with. I think we made significant progress on 2 or 3 of them. But the issues involved what's the scope of the information that we would gather to try to share so that the government agencies that have access to some of the signatures of those cyber threats can share them with industry. Industry that's been attacked can share it with other industry and can share it with the government. So what's the scope of the information that should be gathered? What's the purpose for which that evidence or that information can be used? In other words, if you gather material, is it solely confined to use to protect infrastructure, protect trade secrets, or if you discover other criminal or other activity, what use can be made of it? And then there were issues as to what the lead agency should be. Should it be a civilian agency like DHS, or should it be an agency like NSA that may be far more efficient, but since we're talking about private data, there was a level of discomfort with the idea of the NSA as opposed to a civilian agency like DHS being the primary point of intake. And then the final issue, which made the least progress on, it was the issue of minimization. And that is, to what degree should the private sector remove personally identifiable information before sharing it with the government? And on that final issue where we made the least progress, I think the debate will be significantly impacted by the Snowden disclosures. I think the degree to which the public may be willing to have the prospect of more personal information shared with NSA or the IC is probably a lot less than it was in the pre-Snowden disclosure world. So those issues still remain on the table. There is, of course, the other complete category of issues involving infrastructure and the degree to which the government will either on a voluntary basis or a mandatory basis ask industry responsible for that critical infrastructure to meet certain standards. So those are the remaining issues, I think, on just the CISPA piece that we have to resolve. But you're right, there are not only a broad recognition of the problem and this massive transfer of wealth, even quite apart from the risk that's posed to our defense, our weapons systems, our national secrets, but also some considerable hurdles in the approach we take to meet those challenges.
Congressman Thornberry, can you talk a little bit about how this is operating in the post-Snowden era as it relates specifically to defense, to DOD's responsibilities, the things you all talk about on the House Armed Services Committee?
Well, we're not in the post-Snowden era yet because he dribbles out a leak here and there out of context with obviously a clear agenda. And it does color our ability to move forward, I think, on some of these issues. I'm really fairly optimistic that the House has passed the information sharing bill twice. It looks like the Senate has kind of narrowed its focus. It's not going to insist on some giant, 2,000-page bill to solve all the problems in cyber. It's going to narrow its focus. And so I'm fairly optimistic that the issues that Adam laid out can be resolved and we could do information sharing bill, which, as your previous panel was just talking about, would be very helpful. But because of the Snowden leaks and some of the other things, politically it's hard to move forward at this moment. Hopefully, we can move forward before there is some sort of devastating attack. I mean, it's serious enough that we have this constant stealing of information, including vital defense information. It's worrisome enough that some countries are using cyberspace to advance their agenda, even some of the folks that are not the most sophisticated actors. But clearly the potential for a devastating sort of attack is there, and we need to act before that. I think there's all sorts of interesting questions raised by some of the issues involved in the information sharing bill, as well as some of the NSA things. For example, where is your personal data safer? In the hands of a private entity or in the hands of the government? And so there's lots of issues that are raised. I guess my thought is we don't have to solve everything at once, but we can take some steps in the right direction, and information sharing would be a key step, even though it doesn't solve and doesn't purport to solve all of the challenges that we face in cyberspace.
One of the big questions that we were talking about as we were thinking about the idea of the Pentagon's cyber battlefield is, of course, the budgetary issues. The military has been hit by sequestration. Now, obviously, the furloughs, of course, there's an announcement this weekend by the Defense Secretary. How bad is this budget impacting this environment? I'd like to get the answer from both of you on that.
It makes a significant difference. I mean, our thought in passing on September 29th and 30th the Pay Our Military Act was that essentially all military would be paid and everyone who supports the military would be paid. Now, it took the Pentagon lawyers about a week to understand what that meant. But finally this weekend they said, okay, most of these civilians, not all, but most of these civilians can go back. But still, the upheaval, I think, is a detriment to the country. And I know this is painful, but what I personally hope is that when we get through this, we can have some stability in defense and intelligence budgets. Because if you think about it, if you're competing with Google and Apple for the top quality people in cyber, this living from CR to CR, the threat of sequestration, all that goes with that, makes it a difficult working environment to recruit people, because you're not going to beat them on salary. It's going to be something else. And so some stability in defense and intelligence budgets, I hope, comes out of this, and I think it will be very important to building the kind of capability we need.
Well, I would just add, from the intelligence community perspective, obviously this has been a very destructive exercise, and while in the Defense Intelligence Agency arena and the DoD side of our intelligence funding, there are going to be a lot of employees called back to work. Still on the civilian side, there are going to be a lot of folks who remain away from their posts, and obviously our adversaries who are looking to attack us either on a cyber basis or on a physical basis aren't being furloughed. So it's a real setback, and as Mac points out, it's just one of a kind of continuing set of economic body blows to that workforce, to have stagnant wages, to have now furloughs, and you can imagine the intelligence community already has some serious morale issues given the context we've been reading about it in the papers for quite a long time now, or it seems like a long time. So it's very destructive. I do wonder whether we need as massive a furlough as we're seeing in the intelligence community, where I understand 70% of the workforce is being furloughed. That seems to be a pretty strict reading of the furlough requirements, considering the very direct nexus between protecting the national security and those jobs. But nonetheless, they have very good attorneys within the IC who I'm sure are being conservative in their judgment, and so it's had a real impact on our ability to do the job. I'm sure that within the IC they're prioritizing, and so some of the analysts that are working on less immediate targets from a cyber and other point of view are probably those that would be furloughed first. But I will make one other point, because this will extend beyond the furlough and the immediate budget problem, and that is we're obviously going to be in a budget-constrained environment for a long time. And one of the most significant new expenditures in the last decade has been on cyber within the intelligence community, and that will probably continue. There has been no other area where I've been as concerned with the prospect that we could be investing a vast sum of money in systems that have the potential of being outdated the minute they go online, because cyber changes so quickly. So from a budgetary oversight point of view, this is a really key area to make sure that what we invest now is not only going to be a good investment tomorrow, but won't be quickly overcome by what our adversaries are doing in the cyber arena. And it may be that cyber turns out to be the asymmetric battlefield of all asymmetric battlefields, in the sense that while yes, having the top cyber capability from an offensive point of view is a great advantage, nonetheless, a small investment in a cyber by our adversaries may be sufficient to overcome a mass expenditure on cyber defense by ourselves. And this is a challenge we're going to have in this budget-constrained environment.
Do you share that concern?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Clearly, the United States has more to protect than anybody else. So the danger of asymmetric value in what some country can do to harm us is definitely there. I mean, I think where our resources and capability ought to go is primarily in people. I guess my concern is not so much we're going to spend money wastefully on technology and people right now. My concern is more that our laws and policies won't keep up with the adversaries' changing tactics and evolving threat that we face. And that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning at the beginning. We have to figure out how something that moves this quickly, that poses a danger to this many sectors of our economy, can be dealt with in a constitutional legal framework that we're all comfortable with. Again, post Snowden when we get there. So I think that is a big challenge, and that is a lot of appropriate questions for us to ask on intelligence and also for us to ask on the military side.
I just want to remind you all that the hashtag for the event is Cyber7, and to let you know, if you were standing in the back, feel free to bring your cup of coffee and hang out with us in the front. There are a couple of open seats. I don't think anybody wants to stand all morning, so feel free to come up here and hang out. So you mentioned people repeatedly, and both of you have, and looking at our cyber workforce. The last panel, I don't know how much that you heard, was talking about recruitment and retention. And we had folks who are in the private sector talking about what impetus is there for them to stay in the government, to stay in the NSA, to stay in the IC on that side, rather than to go to the public sector, or the private sector, where there are increased salaries and more opportunity. So my question to both of you all is, how do you keep them here instead of seeing them go to those offshoot companies?
One answer, I think, is greater flexibility. And the bottom line is you'll never outpay the private sector. What gets and keeps people is they get to do cool stuff in the government. But one of the, on the armed services side, one of the things we keep asking is, do we have the flexibility to get and keep the kind of people we want? And are the career tracks for military folks sufficiently flexible that it fits this new kind of specialty that may not fit exactly in a traditional military sort of specialty? So I do think for us in congressional oversight, in both intelligence and the military, that asking these questions about pay and incentives, but also career tracks, and whether we have the right sort of arrangements for people who want to serve their country in this way, that we make it possible for them to do that. I think that is part of our job, to keep asking, and certainly we're trying to do that.
We had a commission up here before the committee recently, and one of the issues that they had looked into was the IC's ability to recruit and attract and retain top talent, particularly in the technological area. Yahoo's and the Microsofts and Apples. And they've made a number of interesting observations. We've obviously accelerated our efforts at recruiting at college campuses. But when you look at how many campuses the IC does interviews on and how many actually join the agency, it's a very small number. And one of the points that they were making is, young people, they're very idealistic. They want to be able to serve the country. They want to be able to take on challenges, do things that they can't do anywhere else. And the government and the IC provides those opportunities. But we have to make that clear to young people that are graduating college or graduating from graduate school, that they'll have the opportunity to work on some of the most path-breaking science and technologies, that they can do that in the service of the country. And because those that are attracted to the intelligence community, to public service generally, the paramount concern is not the paycheck. If it was, they'd go somewhere else. But it's not always clear, I think, when we do our recruiting, that we have these attributes to offer. That recruiting is, I think, going to be a lot more challenging right now. If you're a young person and you've been reading the newspaper, or probably more likely reading online, you may not be thinking about joining the NSA right now, given the beating the NSA has been taking. But the NSA needs great, bright, idealistic people. And the NSA has some of the most talented, brilliant people. And we need to keep that pipeline going. So we have our set of challenges. But I think because we can only do so much on the pay side, being able to appeal to the opportunity to serve and the opportunity to do science and engineering and be on the cutting edge of technology could be very attractive.
I want to ask about specific global threats. If you're looking at places like China, like Iran, like Syria, for both of you, are we doing enough right now to counter those threats that seem to be ever present?
Are we doing enough? No, is the clear answer. And I think I break it into two buckets. One is, are we doing enough to make it harder for them to attack us by hardening our own systems, by improving our cyber protection here at home? And that gets back to the information sharing and the other sorts of ideas and proposals that have been floating around that have not quite made their way to the President's desk. I hope, as I said, that gets rectified. I mean, the other side of it is, are we doing enough from a military standpoint, not only defensively but offensively? And there, I think it is the area where we are, the people and the technology is far outpacing the laws and the policies. So that's where we're really playing a lot of catch up. And we hadn't caught up yet. So, and we have to work our way through these issues. As Adam was talking about privacy and some of the other things, how do these unique challenges of cyberspace fit in our legal policy framework with the different values that are at stake? And the United States is on the cutting edge of these things. So if we start to do something, say, offensively, does that set a precedent for what other countries can do? And we have to think through those issues. So that's why I think the policy and the legal stuff is lagging, and we have a lot more catch up to do to be in a position where we really can do everything we could do to defend the country.
I'd probably break it down in two or three ways. Are we doing enough on protecting critical infrastructure? Are we doing enough on protecting our DoD agencies and secrets? And are we doing enough to prevent the theft of IP and the body blow on our economy? And I would say, in terms of protecting DoD and our core national security interests, we're never doing enough, but we are making a vigorous effort, which is proportionate to the resources that we can devote to the task. So, I think we are doing what is necessary, although we always need to do more. In terms of protecting critical infrastructure, I don't think we've done nearly enough. And in the category of protecting ourselves from the massive transfer of wealth by the theft of our intellectual capital, we're not really doing anything of significance. And that is an ongoing, persistent, and overwhelming injury we're suffering right now. I think we have devoted our resources where they're most necessary, but we have a lot more to do. The primary and most capable actors are in Russia and China. But we see increasing sophistication in Iran, and we see, probably more than nuisance capabilities in places like Syria, and that is only going to accelerate. We can't allow it to be a circumstance where it takes a really serious cyber attack on our infrastructure to get us motivated.
There was an interesting question that came up on Twitter earlier. A person asked, should the American government be tackling cyber threats through offensive or defensive means? So I'd be curious to get both of your takes on that.
Yes. One never wins a competition strictly by reacting to what the other side is doing. So you will always lose if you're always on the defensive. But that's why I think it is so critical. If we were to take and these words kind of get a little muddled about what offensive defensive is, but generally, if we were to take some sort of offensive action kinetically, then generally the president will consult with Congress and so forth before it happens, depending on the circumstances. I think it is really important that the administration consult with Congress on the rules of engagement for offensive action in cyberspace. Again, this stuff is happening at the speed of light. You're not going to be able to come and consult. It's unreasonable to expect them to as it's happening. So you need to kind of have the rules of the game laid out ahead of time, not down to finite detail, but at least in a general way. And so that's part of the reason I keep coming back to these policy and legal issues, because the more you have them sorted out ahead of time, the smoother things will go when the electrons start flying.
Well, I would say I agree. We need both the offensive and the defensive capability. Clearly, we need the defensive capability. In terms of the offensive capability, and if worse ever came to worse, you need to have the offensive capability. And cyber is a key component of the new kind of warfare that we're in. Even apart from any kind of doomsday scenario, if you have a limited military operation, the ability to go in and compromise the systems of your adversary is a key component of warfare. So we need that offensive capability. Also, developing the offensive capability teaches us a little bit about what other capabilities might be used against us. The real challenging thing, I think, as Mac alluded to, are those situations that are a little bit of both. Let's say that we have a cyber attack that comes in and is stealing our material or damaging our computer systems or infrastructure, and we can see the home address of where this is coming from. It's a grave temptation to say, why don't we just follow that electronic trail back and blow up the machine that sent it to us? Some of these people who are attacking us are state actors. Some are quasi-state actors. They're like private hacker bounty hunters. And if you can go in and quite easily destroy their infrastructure, you make them pay a price for the attacks on us. But there's never 100% certainty on those things that the electronic missile you send back to blow up their system doesn't go awry and end up attacking someone else's system. So those are very difficult calls and a complete kind of another world of cyber. And I think Mac is right. We need to try to develop some international protocol in this dangerous new world we're in about what kind of a cyber response is appropriate when cyber attacked.
We're just about out of time, but I want to get you guys very quickly to respond to, on HASC, on Intel, what should we and our viewers be watching for next with regards to cybersecurity in those committees?
Oh, the elephant in the room is budget stability, I think. So that's the key. That's the key for people. That's the key to be able to plan ahead on any endeavor. And so if I have one priority at this stage, it is to have some budget stability, and then we can continue to work on these policy and legal issues.
Well, I never thought we would shut down, and then once we did, I never thought it would go beyond a week. So I'm batting 0 for 2 in my predictions, so I would take any projections I give you with a big grain of salt. But I think it's very unlikely that we make much progress on cyber legislation, on significant cyber legislation this calendar year. I think a lot will depend on the report, the framework the administration comes out with in, I think, February next year, what their recommendations are in terms of protecting critical infrastructure. And we'll continue trying to work through those cyber issues I mentioned at the outset, House and Senate, to see if we can pre-agree or pre-conference or come to some meeting of the minds on it. But given the crowded nature of the docket right now, and the competition with all the FISA court and other metadata reforms that are percolating, it's hard for me to see cyber information sharing legislation breaking through that during this calendar year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see much legislatively until the administration comes out with its framework in February.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. For our next conversation, I'll turn it back over to Tony, who will be joined by Chairman Mike McCall. I'll be interested to hear what his forecast is for the legislation moving forward. Thank you all so much. Thank you guys so much for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you having us.
Long time no see. How are things?
Steady.
Thanks, Juana, for turning it over. Of course, we've got Chairman Michael McCall sitting next to me. Chairman McCall, how are you? Thanks for coming here.
Doing fine. Thanks
You
for
know,
having
the question that we've started off with everybody, we'll start off with you as well, and that's obviously the government shutdown. It's on everyone's minds. It seems to have serious impacts on cybersecurity. So start us off and give us the state of play.
It is having an impact. The Department of Homeland Security is about 85% overall, but with respect to cybersecurity operations, it's about 57%. And I would argue that puts the nation at risk. I don't think anybody wants this government shutdown. I think it's imperative we try to get the government back up and running, particularly when it comes to national security issues like this one.
Sure, and just as a heads up to all of you out there, we have seats in the front if you guys don't want to stand in the back there. But to continue on the government shutdown, one of the things that I had asked Senator Chambliss at the earlier panel was whether these sorts of constant debates over the budget, over government finances, are really having a serious impact on Congress's ability to have policy discussions, whether it's crowding out the schedule, it's taking up too much bandwidth. What do you think about that?
Well, it's look, we have a lot of issues on the table. I got a border security bill out there. I've got a cyber bill that we're hopefully going to mark up in the near future. And this is taking the attention away from all these other issues. It's an important debate that we're having right now. And I think in terms of government spending, this is front and center for a lot of members of Congress. It's coming to a culmination right now. But it is kind of sucking the oxygen out of the room, if you will, in D.C. And these other priority issues, the ones I've had with respect to security issues, I think are kind of put on the table, shelved for a while.
Sure, and one of our questions for Cyber7 for this panel is what's next for Capitol Hill? But you mentioned putting everything on hold. You had said previously that that's the same exact thing that happened with Edward Snowden. That is, these revelations had come out. They had somewhat hit the pause button on congressional debates over cybersecurity. Talk to us about that.
Well, you remember that if you look back historically, we had CISPA. Excuse me, my voice is kind of lost a little bit. We had CISPA pass. My amendment to CISPA, which basically codified DHS's role, which I think got the bill 60 additional votes, which established the civilian interface rather than the military. That was all had a lot of momentum. And then Snowden happened, and it kind of put the brakes on CISPA. And with respect to my legislation, we've had over 300 meetings with the private sector, with the industry stakeholders. We've listened to them. We've circulated, we're on the second draft of the bill that we've circulated to the sectors, if you will, the critical infrastructure sectors. We will be working on the third draft and hopefully the final. Gotten some great feedback. Chamber just weighed in yesterday. And so I think that's moving forward. And I think what I have to make the case is that, look, this bill is really what we need right now after Snowden. It's not a surveillance bill. It is a bill that really codifies the civilian interface to the private sector rather than the military. I think the thing with the NSA was he had a military interface to the critical infrastructures. DHS is in the best position to do that. And I think if anything, the Snowden case demonstrates that need, and it also has nothing to do with surveillance or, and the other thing, international businessmen that I talked to, Dell, for instance, who's in my hometown of Austin, you know, this is impacting their ability to do international business, you know, this whole NSA issue. And I think for them to say, look, we're working in security with a civilian partner rather than a military, I think makes a better case, and one that I can make, I think, to the members of Congress and to my conference.
Sure, I want to get back to your legislation in a second, but on information sharing, which a lot of privacy advocates never liked in the first place, but now especially don't like in the wake of the Snowden revelations. Is information sharing in serious trouble this year? Can this bill become law before the end of 2013?
Well, I mean, Snowden doesn't help, but we, you know, for instance, we had the ACLU testify before my committee that's saying that we prefer the civilian interface over the military. We just got feedback from the ACLU on our bill. I don't know if they'll be 100% behind it. I don't know if that would be a realistic expectation. On the other hand, I think we've really worked out a lot of the privacy concerns. One thing they do like about the department is that we have a robust privacy office within the department that will ensure that personal data is not shared, that it's malicious codes, not privacy-related data, not content. And so I think we have the case to make there. The timetable starting to run out, as you mentioned, with the government shutdown. My preference would have been to have gotten this through by the end of this year. You know, next year is a political year.
Yeah.
And a lot of times legislation, good policy goes by the wayside. And I think, yeah, the thing is, when you look at the threats, and everybody in this room knows what the threats really are, but sometimes we forget that. We forget that, say, Iran has knocked out 30,000 hard drives in Aramco. We forget that Iran is also hitting our financial sector almost on a daily basis. And, you know, it's unfortunate this town drives by crisis. So if you don't have a crisis, like a debt ceiling limit coming up or a government shutdown, we fail to act. And I'd rather have this thing done before the crisis happens. What I'm concerned is it will take a cyber event of enormous proportions, which we know can happen, before Congress finally acts on the issue.
Sure, but it sounds like from what you're saying that you do think that this might spill into 2014, and then from anyone's guess, with the political year, we might be in some trouble.
I think it makes it more difficult. That's why, again, we're, I think our third and final draft that we've circulated to the private stakeholders, I don't want to repeat the mistakes this committee made last Congress where they didn't have the buy-in from the stakeholders in the private sector. And this is an industry-driven bill. It's a voluntary piece of legislation, but it also allows the private sector to share not only with the federal government with the private sector, but also across sector lines, which is not happening right now.
Sure.
That I can't emphasize how important that is, because 90% of it's owned by the private sector, the critical infrastructures, and therefore 90% of the threat information is in the private sector. So we have to have a shared relationship with the private sector, not a forced, mandatory, regulatory one.
Sure, so let's talk about your legislation. In the earlier draft that we had obtained and written about, it was the National Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. The name may have changed, but talk a little bit about your latest thinking as to where we go from here and how we address the problem.
Well, yeah, here's what you got: .mil.gov.com. So NSA, and you heard from, Mac Thornberry and Adam Schiff, Armed Services, and they'll tell you that the foreign intelligence information coming out of NSA is vitally important. It does provide that signature threat information, but it's just a little piece. The other piece is, what does the FBI have? What does Homeland Security have? And that's dealing more, again, with the .gov.com space. And then what does the private sector have? Again, the critical infrastructures being 90% owned have the biggest share of that threat information. Yet what is the state of play today? They are not incentivized to share that with the federal government. The federal government does share some of this information with them, but most importantly, they can't share between sector lines. We want to create a safe harbor within the NCIC at DHS where these sectors can actually participate on the floor, the 16 sectors, sharing this information, and most importantly with liability protections. If you don't give them liability protections, you've taken away their incentive to share that information with you, which is why that is so important. But also, most importantly, to share across sector lines amongst themselves in the private sector. That would take care of a lot of the threats today in terms of bolstering our defense mechanisms. We are great at offensive capability. I mean, our NSA, our military is next to none. Where we're weak in this country is our defensive game, our defensive posture. And that's what this bill is trying to protect, because DHS is the only agency, department in the position to protect these critical infrastructures, working with the private sector. So whether it's a power grid going down, like in the Northeast, like Sandy, imagine a cyber event that takes down the power grid. That was about that was an $80 billion disaster. It could be even worse than a cyber attack.
Sure, and one of the fundamental things that we noticed in analyzing earlier drafts of the bill, and this very much may have changed, was that your legislation took a much different tack than the executive order. The president very much wanted DHS and NIST to lead a process to create voluntary cybersecurity standards and encourage industry to put them together. I very much got the impression that your legislation wanted that to be concentrated almost entirely at the industry level with as little federal involvement as possible. Talk about that balance and give us your sense of the executive order so far.
Well, there's some good things about the executive order. I think NIST has come out with a framework. I think some concerns in the private sector is that these standards and best practices, if driven by NIST rather than industry, will lead to a regulatory framework. And I think that is what they're most concerned with. When you talk about information sharing, how can you possibly have a true partnership if it's forced? If you're regulatory, let's take the EPA, for instance. EPA regulates private sector. Is the private sector incentivized to share information with the EPA? I don't think so. It's really counterproductive, counterintuitive to have a regulatory relationship over the private sector to force compliance. So we take the model of, look, if you incentivize with liability protections, you are going to create a true information sharing partnership that's a win-win. And so that's why when I say industry-driven, it is so important. Now, the Senate Commerce passed a bill that the NIST is involved as a facilitator, but not dictating the standards and best practices. The industry is actually coming up with those solutions, and I think that's a better model. The IT sector, the telecom sector, they are way ahead of, I think, the government in terms of what needs to be done to protect their sectors.
Sure, but let's play devil's advocate for a moment here. If the cybersecurity framework ends up being this 50,000-foot view on what you should do, a very baseline standard for cybersecurity, as Chris Finan put it in our earlier panel, and this is stuff that companies already should be doing to protect data, to secure against cyber threats, domestic and international. Does it make sense to reward these companies with incentives like liability protection or more when they should have been doing this stuff in the first place?
Well, this would be liability protections only to the extent they are sharing the information. They can't be held liable for the information they shared. So we do want to incentivize that, because the more threat, signature threat codes are known out there, the easier a company can patch that and protect them from that threat getting in the door. It'd be like someone saying there's someone who's going to break in your house. I'm going to warn you about that in advance. Here's how you can block the door, and he can't get in. It's really kind of very simplified concept. But the codes are out there, and they're ever evolving. We can't have a prescriptive, rigid system. It's got to be ever evolving, and most importantly, it has to be in real time. Because these threats are happening in real time, and they're changing. The enemy changes them and evolves, whether it's China with espionage, whether it's intellectual property, and whether it's a cyber warfare attack, which we're seeing Iran attempting to do, and other rogue nations getting greater sophistication. That's the biggest concern I have, and everybody in the military will tell you, this is the future, and it's going to happen. It's not a question of if, but when, and we need to be prepared for that.
Sure. Just a reminder, we've got a few minutes left, so please tweet your questions to @PoliticoEvents. I'll ask them if you tweet them, but we do have one from the audience, and I apologize for not really being sure how to pronounce your Twitter name. But the question is, what's the plan to get the trust of the American public and the foreign public back on cybersecurity, particularly in light of what happened with Edward Snowden and those leaks?
Well, and I'll be honest. I think there is a natural tendency to bleed over what happened with NSA and Snowden into the bill I'm trying to get passed.
And many cybersecurity bills across
Anything
Capitol
that
Hill.
says cyber, I think people think, oh, you're going to be sharing personal data, and it raises, obviously a lot of issues. I would again make the argument that this is very different because this is the civilian interface to the private sector, not the military. It's not the NSA. It's not surveillance. We have a robust privacy office. If a company shares any data, it's all code, it's not content, but if they share malicious code threats, and there happens to be any personal data attached, the privacy office immediately scrubs and deletes that and then stops the information sharing partnership until the company can fix their problem. So there are a lot of safeguards in place, which is what we've been working with the ACLU on. I was a federal prosecutor for many years. For me, it's discussing things with the ACLU. It's not my normal bedfellow, but in this case, it makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
Because I think people, they want an assurance that we are going to protect the privacy of Americans, which the NSA debate has really put front and center. But politically, you're absolutely right. That's the obstacle that I have to overcome.
Sure. And so speaking about one of those safeguards, obviously, is minimization. We saw a huge debate during CISPA in particular about whether the company should have to take reasonable steps, or whatever language you wanted to use there, to minimize private data before it landed in the hands of the federal government. Is that the sort of thing that needs to be revisited as a way of potentially increasing public trust, given everything that's happened recently?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think they want any personal data being shared, and that's not what we want anyway. We just want the threat information itself. It'd be like, when I was in the counterterrorism prosecutor, we didn't, sources and methods, we'd scrub that and just share the threat information with the state and locals. So similar kind, we don't care about the personal data. We care about the malicious code that we can then share with not only the federal government, but within the sectors in the private sector.
Sure. Lastly, Chairman McCall, the big question obviously is DHS, your committee, it being Homeland Security, oversees the Department of Homeland Security. Is it a concern to you that there are vacancies at this agency, especially as it takes on a significant role in the cyber mission?
Yeah, very much so. Jane Lute, who really was in charge of cyber operations, great champion for the department's efforts. It was very sad to see her go. I had a great relationship with her. That assignment is vacant, along with many of the top posts within the department are vacant, including the Secretary of Homeland Security. That's been vacant for a month. Mm-hmm. So not only with respect to cyber, Boston, the shopping malls in Nairobi, the spider web that's growing in Northern Africa and the Middle East, Syria, all this stuff is a rising threat to the homeland, and yet it's vacant at the top. And it makes me wonder, is this administration serious about this department and serious about its homeland security efforts? Because I think the threat is greater than it was before 9/11, not less. And this is not a vote of confidence in the department and in their mission and their efforts. And when the next, terrorism event happens in the United States, they're going to be held accountable for that.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, this is all the time we have. Again, thank you so much, Chairman Michael McCall.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it.
Good seeing you.
Thank you.
I'm staying.
Thank you.
All right, well, next up we have Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, top member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congresswoman.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So let's just get right into it. We've asked this question of everybody. You're not going to escape this one either. Talk about the government shutdown. Where are we? Where are we going?
Oh boy, I would have to say that I was a lot more optimistic that it would be over very quickly about a week and a half ago. But now it's sounding like we might go all the way to the debt ceiling, which I hope we don't. But it's all about making sure that we are talking to each other. I actually voted against my own party on the medical devices tax. I voted for the repeal. Sure. So I think that there are ways to work together. But first we need to just get a clean budget passed so that we can get the government open again.
Do you think there are the votes in the House for that?
I do. I do.
So talk about then what this entire thing means for the Department of Defense and for the other agencies and personnel who are working on the cyber mission right now. Is it as dire as we've been told all day today?
I really think it is. I believe that something like 72% of the cyber community in defense and in intelligence are on furlough right now. So that's data that's not being analyzed. That's data that's not being scrubbed. And we could be missing, attacks. I mean, if somebody wanted to attack us, this would be a great time to launch a cyber attack against the United States, because the folks who would be detecting the attacks and also defending against those attacks are on furlough and not allowed to even do their jobs.
Sure, and this is on top of long-standing concerns about sequestration and other sorts of budget cuts at the Pentagon and other federal agencies. Talk a little bit about what that's done to the Pentagon and its mission.
It's just the whole uncertainty. It's the cutbacks. It's the folks who are on furlough. It's the uncertainty of what the next mission is going to be, how folks are going to fit into it. It's really hurt morale. I think that sequestration is very insidious, right? If you're from a district like mine where we don't have a lot of large defense, military bases, you don't see it right away, but it's showing up in education programs, it's showing up in social services, and I think that's what's happening also just across the intelligence community, in that those folks just are not sitting at their desks doing their jobs.
Sure, absolutely. So what we had discussed in the previous two panels with Congressman Thornberry, Congressman Schiff, is whether the Pentagon and other parts of the federal government are really ready for the cybersecurity battlefield. Some of these new threats coming from places like China and Iran. Talk to us a little bit about readiness, even outside the concerns of the budget and sequestration.
Sure, so I think that they are improving, but I don't think we're ready. I really see cyber as a new realm of military operations. So we started off, if you go back in history, indulge me a little bit. You look at what happens with, the Roman Empire and it was all about the ground battle. It was about controlling territory. And then we moved on to the next realm of operation, which is sea power. And so you had the rise of the British Empire and the domination of the sea power. But the sea power was not just about battles on the oceans. It was about also delivering logistics. It was also about delivering those ground troops into the territory to control the ground. Then when you had, with the World War II in Vietnam, you saw the rise of air power. And that air power was critically important in logistics, in delivering the troops, but also in making sure that we dominated the skies as well. And I really see cyber as that next realm of military operations, in that it has to be there in all the other, in air, land, the air-land battle and on the seas as well. But it has its own realm of operations. Just like we had to dominate the skies in terms of aviation power, and we need to dominate the oceans with naval power, we had to do the same in cyber. And if you look at where our troops who are fighting the cyber war are, they're great folks, but they don't start out as cyber warriors. They start out as infantrymen or aviation or whatever else it is, and at some point somebody looks at them and goes, a great career field for you to switch over where you might get promoted is cyber. Why don't you go there? But if you look at the Chinese military, the people fighting their cyber warriors are recruited right out of college. They probably have 1 or 2 PhDs. This is all that they do. And so our folks are really playing catch up, and we have to build that infrastructure within our military, but also within our educational system, so that we can actually produce the cyber warriors, just like we have the Navy SEALs and we have the Green Berets, right? They are the absolute best at what they do. We don't quite have that yet in cyber, because that's not what those folks, our cyber warriors, do 100% of the time, and they didn't start out their career becoming, the Green Berets of the cyber war.
Sure. How do we fix that, though? Where's the solution start? I mean, everybody will probably agree that education has to improve, but how do you fix that problem in a specific, tailored, effective way?
Well, I think there's several things. If you're looking at in terms of recruiting the cyber warriors, we actually have to recruit people from the time that they join the military, that this is the career field they want to get into. This is their primary thing. This is all they do. The guys who become Green Berets, the guys who become, aviators, who become Navy SEALs, this is what they go for, right? This is the premier elite thing that they do. I just don't think that we're quite there yet for the cyber warriors. These are folks who have secondary skills. My husband does enterprise network infrastructure and cybersecurity for the National Guard. But he was an air defense artilleryman to start off with, right? He was a Stinger missile platoon leader, but he, in a civilian world, did this. And so now he's moved into this new field. But it's not what he's done for his entire career. And we need to invest in that in the military. I also think at the national level, we need an encompassing cyber policy, something that sort of governs both our national security and the cyber war itself, but also protects individual rights and citizens' privacy and all of that. And we don't have anything that's overarching in that way.
Sure, and we're going to talk about reform in a minute, but to your point about recruiting these new cyber warriors, I mean, General Keith Alexander, who's going to be here later, would say the same exact thing. He went to Capitol Hill. He's asked for thousands of new cyber warriors, the goal being to staff up these offensive and defensive teams. But repeatedly what he's told from members of the Hill in these budget documents that maybe aren't necessarily well publicized is that there's an issue with finding the talent and paying for it. What do you think?
Well, there is, but I also think, look, our military men and women work for relatively little pay compared to the outside world, and to get the cyber warriors, I don't think that the dollar amounts is always the thing. You know, you couldn't pay somebody in the civilian world to do what, you know, a Green Beret does. They do it out of love and dedication to their nation and the pride of what they do. So that's part of that recruiting as well. And I think that there's just a lack of understanding of cyber as a new realm of military operations.
Sure.
And I'm sort of having those conversations on armed services with my colleagues that, look, this is a whole new realm. This is a new battlefield that we have to fight on.
Sure, so that $4.7 billion that the president had requested for the next fiscal year for Pentagon cybersecurity spending, huge boost. You would support that kind of expansion?
I would have to take a look at exactly
Sure.
what it would encompass. You know, I'm not going to sign a blank check either. You know, so you know, there are things that the military does better now, but there are other things where partnership with civilian organizations would be good. You know, we have a lot of folks who have far more experience at protecting financial security networks in the civilian world, providers, you know, who are much better at it than the U.S. military is. So we need to take a look at those civilian providers of you know, just broadband access and internet access and what they have in place. So let's make sure that we don't try to create something in the military that already exists and is functioning in the civilian world.
Sure. You know, of course, that brings up the question of the insider threat, obviously. You want to bring more people into the federal government. You want to hire more contractors. You increase the number of people who have access to this information. And there are plenty of people who would draw a straight line, honestly, between the Edward Snowden revelations and the expanding roles of federal contractors and folks who have access to this material, which leads me to a question that was sent to us from Twitter. How do you fix this problem? How do you attract all of these workers while improving the security clearance process, improving the filters in place to make sure you're getting the right people?
Well, I think that it's a balance. I don't think that you want just to open the doors and just have all these civilian contractors come in. I think one of the problems that we have in the military now is the privatization of military operations. You know, sometimes it's good if you to have a civilian company run the housing on a military base, but sometimes it's bad. You don't need, you know, Blackwater or Z or whatever that company is called now, providing security for our bases when we have U.S. troops who can do that. So it's that balance of how you do it. One of the things I'm really interested in is the role of veterans in the cyber world and in these areas. I've actually been looking at U.S. ports. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our veterans who are applying to go work come into the civilian world with secret clearances and sometimes top secret clearances. But when they go to the Department of Homeland Security to apply for a job there, that DoD clearance is not recognized. So they can't even go get a job as a forklift driver on a U.S. port, at a U.S. port with a secret clearance from the DoD. They have to wait to get a Homeland Security clearance. So some of this is also just leveraging the talent that we have, the skills, the security that we have, and the training. These men and women who come out of the military have the security training. They understand information operations. They understand, you know, every year you get briefings on the importance of information security. In fact, I just completed my module in the National Guard last month. So let's leverage the talent that we have and make sure that as we bring in the civilian workforce that, you know, they get that same type of training.
Sure, there are questions about personnel, then there's obviously policy. Talk a little bit overall about how you feel of the president's strategy on cybersecurity. Lots of questions about the moving pieces, but how would you grade how the White House has done on addressing these threats?
Well, I think they're better than anyone else, but I think there's room for improvement.
Sure. What needs to be fixed?
Well, one of the things that I was glad that had been fixed was, and I think maybe this was more of a congressional, you know, I voted for CISPA.
Sure.
I voted for CISPA, but I voted for CISPA after the amendment was put into place to place overall responsibility under Homeland Security and not the NSA, because I do not want the military, I do not want a general in charge of a program that will deal with privacy and information and PII for civilian. We need to have, the military should always be subservient to the civilian. And so some of those things we need to look at. I don't think that, again, we have an overarching federal standard for cyber, and that's something we need to move towards. And I think that White House could do, even better job of getting that out there. Because, as I said, I talked about ports. The U.S. Coast Guard does not have oversight of the cybersecurity in our port system. Yet, if you go to any port in the U.S., you have actually people who rent space, right? People who occupy space, different companies, and their network to govern their business's operations is tied into that port's network. So they're tied into the logistics system, the reporting of when the ships come in, when do the trucks have to show up to move the products off of the containers, off of the ships onto the trucks. There is no security audit being done on those people who are the folks who live and work on that port system. Coast Guard should have the authority to do that, and they don't.
Sure, absolutely. So you mentioned CISPA. CISPA obviously was written and amended and passed by the House long before the Snowden debacle had come to light. Would you have still voted for that legislation, given all that we know now? And do you think that there's going to be a push on Capitol Hill for more strict limits on information sharing with cybersecurity?
After all of the briefings that I went to, and I went to when I started, I was not very supportive of CISPA, but I went to multiple briefings. I talked to a lot of folks, both in and out of government. For me, the key thing was and still is that oversight of the whole project is under a civilian authority, because I think that makes them much more accountable and much more open and much more cognizant of PII and people's privacy. So I would, under the circumstances, I would vote for it again.
Sure. One of the questions asked over Twitter talks about economic security, trade secret theft issues resulting from cyber spies who are stealing intellectual property. Your thoughts on ways to combat that, what Congress and the administration needs to do to stop this problem?
Well, I think that's where we need to definitely do what CISPA was intending to do, which is a closer communications between our businesses as well as our government functions. We have to make it a safe thing for businesses, for these large corporations, the Lockheed Martins, to report that, hey, we have been infiltrated, and the information on our F-35 has actually been stolen and been downloaded. So that communication is critical, but it has to be done in such a way that there are safeguards for the security of that information, that we're not violating people's individual rights, but at the same time that we're helping our businesses. And it can't just all be government, and it can't just all be corporate.
Sure. Congresswoman, last question. We've heard plenty of issues here outside the realm of cybersecurity today, shutdown obviously being the biggest of them. What's your prognosis for whether cybersecurity legislation can even advance before the end of the year? We're very much getting the impression that there are a lot of roadblocks that make the end of 2013 a hard deadline. What do you think?
I think it's very wishful thinking if we think we're going to get there. I mean, we're still waiting for a vote. We've not been allowed to vote on the president's jobs bill. We've not been allowed to vote on immigration reform. We're not being allowed to vote on a clean budget to get government open again. So there's a lot of things in line before the end of the year, and we don't. We have less than 3 months left.
Great. Well, Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Quick game, musical chairs. Oh, where are you? Thank you. And next up, we've got Chairman Mike Rogers and Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, both of the House Intelligence Committee.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Here I am.
Good to see you.
Put this back here.
We've got a pile back there.
Good.
Well, Congressman, thank you both so much for being here. You've probably heard from the back now that we're asking everybody to give us their update on the wonderful government shutdown, where we think we're going from here. Chairman Rogers, you have the wonder of sitting next to me, so you get to go first.
Oh, look at the time. I think we're making some progress. There is, I think we're over half now in mini bills covering the federal government and funding. If we can just get to a point where we negotiate, I think this thing will get done very, very quickly. We haven't quite reached that point yet. I hope we have that point very, very soon.
Congressman Ruppersberger.
Well, what's your question?
Shut down. Go for it. Where
First
are we?
thing, it's a shame that we're at this level. I'm not going to get partisan at all, other than to say that if you put Mike and I in a room for 8 hours, we might be able to resolve the whole issue.
I've been in a markup for 8 hours with the two.
I think one of the things that has to be done is we need to understand the consequences of where we're going now and how many people are being affected, not only employees, private sector now is going to be affected. I live north of Baltimore. Sometimes it takes me 2.5 hours to come to work in the morning. This morning I came from Baltimore. It took me 1 hour and 15 minutes because of the shutdown. So it's an affecting everyone, and it will throughout the country. It makes us weaker as a nation. We are the strongest nation in the world, but we sure are not acting like it.
Sure. How have those effects been felt in the cybersecurity realm here? How has that impacted the federal mission?
Well, on the cybersecurity front that's been maintained, we have now gotten more folks back into the intelligence business. We're still short, so if they've taken a very strict look at what is essential and not in the intelligence business. I think they've overdone it a bit, so they have significantly laid off roughly 60% of their civilian workforce in the intelligence business. I think that's dangerous, and it shouldn't be allowed to continue. Hopefully we'll find our way through this very quickly. You can't take that many people out of the work that the intelligence community does and not have an impact. So other folks are trying to fill the holes with longer hours. Given the threat matrix that we face today, I think we need to work through this pretty quickly.
Presumably that would require a congressional solution to ensure that if this thing were to happen again in the future, that these intelligence workers that you say are critical aren't sent home.
Yeah, I think it will take a congressional solution. We have worked out something this week that we'll hopefully get through the House floor here very, very soon. This is something, at the end of the day, I'd love to see a temporary CR so we can continue negotiating. To me, would be the best solution now. It would let tempers cool down and allow us to get into a negotiating pattern that I think would be very, very helpful to the solution here. We need to do that pretty quickly. As I said, I hope we do it soon. We need to get these intelligence folks back to work. Again, the number of threats hasn't gone away. Certainly the rest of the world watches what we do. And you can probably guess that there are people who would like to fill in the holes, who want to do us harm. And that's what concerns us. And Dutch and I spend a lot of time talking about this stuff and trying to work through these issues.
Yeah, sure. Congressman Ruppersberger, you represent the district where NSA is. I mean, what are you hearing from the contractors around there? They're setting up shop. What are they saying about the shutdown?
The contractors are being impacted. I'm not going to name names. I was talking to one representative, one of the major contractors. They're losing $20 million a day in what's happening because there's not work. The intelligence is the best defense against terrorism. And when you have less people working on that in the cyber realm and other areas, we're going to be more vulnerable. And that's what's happening right now. I consider my district the cyber capital of the world. There are probably more people working on the cyber issue in the 95 corridor. I represent Fort Meade, NSA, Aberdeen, which is the testing center for the military. It's mostly all technology in that area. And these people are being affected. And we're going to see the results of this down the road with that and also the Snowden leak.
The other S word.
Pardon?
The other S word.
Yeah, right.
And that's actually the next question. So with the shutdown, also the Snowden leaks had seemed to put a bit of pressure on Congress when it came to cybersecurity. Does that shake up the entire cyber debate? Does that shake up everything on information sharing and require us to have to go back to the drawing board to restore public trust?
Well, on the public trust front, clearly, but the facts haven't changed. This is the greatest national security threat that we face as a country that we are not prepared to handle. And we have a very unique set of circumstances here that some of our best adversaries in cyber don't have, that we have 80% of the networks are private networks. And the bad guys use our networks to target us. That's important. So when they communicate, they will use
U.S. networks. When they communicate either from a phone call or an email, they will use U.S. networks. That poses a whole series of problems for us to make sure that we aren't violating Americans' privacy, but we are targeting bad guys doing bad things to our networks. So I do think we're going to go through a series of confidence builders in these programs. Much of what you read in the paper is just inaccurate. It is not accurate. It's inflamed. It's not accurate.
What specifically is inaccurate?
Well, let me give you a great example. So the 2,776 privacy violations that were inflamed on the newspaper made it read, boy, when I read the article, I thought, my Lord, I must have missed something. They're out there searching for your personal information for their own desires, especially on the two programs we have publicly debated, BR FISA 215 and the 702 program. At the end of the day, there were 0 willful privacy violations in both of those programs. And what they were technical violations. Let me give you an example. So they were supposed to hold the information for 5 years. They accidentally hold it for 5 years and 30 days. That's a violation. And what they did actually was catch us, congressional oversight, doing their job. That's what that slide indicated. So if you take it out of context, looks pretty awful, looks terrible, looks like there's this horrible effort underway of all these abuses. But when you look at it with the facts and what was happening, it was the organization being overseen, reporting back to Congress, reporting to the court oversight body, saying, hey, we made this mistake, here's the violation, here's how we correct it, which was our job, is to make sure that they do correct those violations when they happen. Here's my other one. About 1,900 of those, a little more, were what are called roamers. I think most Americans would be offended, candidly, that this was considered a violation, meaning if somebody that they're listening to with all the legal authority overseas, somebody from Pakistan who flies to Dubai, they're allowed, if they go through this process, to do that. They can listen to those phone calls. That person goes to France, and then from France to the United States. Contrary to popular belief, they might not know exactly where that phone is at a given time. It may take them a few days, could be even a week, to understand that that person with that phone is now in the United States. That would be considered a violation. Right? Now, think about that. So you get to the United States, I call it winning the terrorist lottery. You get here, and guess what? Now we have this big bureaucratic effort to try to change authorities, make sure that that person, you have to turn it off. Here's the other piece. You have to destroy what you have. You have to report both to us and the court that that's a violation. Now, I don't see that as a privacy violation. I think it's something we're going to have to fix in the law. Hopefully we do fix that. It really doesn't make sense. And it's all about a bureaucratic handoff. And so what happens is sometimes that handoff doesn't happen as smoothly as we would all like. And when they fall in that category, it's a violation. So when you read the newspaper, it sounded like there were 2,776 violations of privacy, of people abusing roughshod over a system. I just think that is horribly inaccurate, and I think it's doing a disservice to the men and women who take an oath, who are showing up every day at the NSA, trying to follow the law, and oh, by the way, trying to catch bad guys.
Sure, but just to play devil's advocate here for a moment, we had an instance, there were a series of documents that the administration itself had declassified, showing an instance in which the FISA court had rebuked the federal government for having accessed digital communications of Americans it should not have. It was a pretty clear instance in which the FISA court said essentially that the NSA had violated the Fourth Amendment. So when you have instances like that, paired against what you say are just technical violations, doesn't that create a serious trust problem? And how do you fix that?
Yeah, but the way it was portrayed was, I think, helps fan the flame of distrust. But when you peel back and understand it was a technical issue, not a purposeful issue.
Self-reported, by the way, by the NSA.
Exactly.
And the way you just presented the question, a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It was self-reported, and it so happened that in the volume of information that was in the pipes, so to speak, it was all there, and they held that. When they held that information or that data. And when the courts realized that, they said you have to separate it. It was a separation, but it was self-reporting. The issue that we're really talking about, Mike and I have talked about this many times. We think that the United States media needs to report and needs to debate the issue of privacy. That's very important. But when you report and don't inflame. Let's get the facts. So we have a problem. We have a perception problem. And Mike and I and the people in this field have to deal with it. We need to get the public trust, because NSA, the people, and a lot of these are my constituents, They get up every day and they work hard and they feel it just like the military. They're protecting our country. And we have threats out there, terrorist threats. We have the Russia-China issue, all of these things that are occurring. And they want to feel good about themselves as Americans, so we have to find a way. Mike and I just yesterday had a meeting to talk about how we need to change some legislation and on how we do the metadata and try to find a way that we're showing to the public you can trust us. There are checks and balances there. People at NSA don't get up and want to listen to your phone conversation or someone else's phone conversation or find out if you have a girlfriend or boyfriend. That's not what they're about. So let's try to resolve this issue. We've tried in our CISPA bill, we've tried to do whatever we can to bring the ACLU into the tent and other people into the tent, as we should. That's our goal, and it's hard because there's a lot of issues as it relates to cyber that are in the weeds. It's very difficult to explain to the average person.
Sure, and I do want to get back to cyber, but let me ask you guys, while I still can, take us through the timeline on what's next when it comes to looking at the intelligence community, looking at some of these FISA and Patriot Act authorities. Do you have a general sense of where we're going, what we should expect before the end of the year?
For a couple of things, and we have been working, Dutch and I have been working with our staffs over.
And we have some different opinions on this too, Mike and I at this point, but we're going to try to resolve it as we usually do.
We will work through, we've committed that this is too important not to work through our differences on this stuff. We worked all of August trying to put together some confidence builders that we think would have people understand we are interested in as much transparency as we can possibly get. We're interested in showing the level of oversight. These are some of the most overseen programs in the government, and I would argue both state and federal. It's unbelievable how much oversight we have on these programs. Because they're classified, it feels like the guy behind the curtain at Oz, in the movie Oz, right? You just don't know who that is. That mystery makes it interesting. Unfortunately, we feel if we can get through this and show the American public, here's some new transparency issues, here's exactly the oversight that we do, here's how minimization procedures work, we think that we can get there. So we've got a whole host of ideas laying on the table that we're working through, not just Dutch and I, in the House, but also Dianne Feinstein and Saxby Chambliss in the Senate. And we've had some really productive
on their intelligence committee.
Right. We've had some very productive, I think, meetings over the summer. One again just was that last week, where we went over some of these confidence builders to try to rebuild trust in these programs, and at the end of the day, still allow us to do it. Remember, these programs are geared and targeted to try to find folks who are overseas who have a U.S. nexus. That's what it's all about, to try to find that one guy who's going to show up at Times Square with a car full of explosives and let it go. Right? That's what these programs are targeted to. We really don't care about collecting people's private conversations or data, which, by the way, they don't do. They don't listen to your phone calls. They don't read your emails, common to popular belief. And they're trying to target this list. So what we're trying to do is get them focused on their job. You imagine if you're in the NSA today and every day some article comes out that's fairly misrepresents the work that you do. It's pretty demoralizing. These are people who took the oath. They're there to do the right thing, to catch bad guys. Every day in the paper, it looks like you're some kind of criminal who's sneaking around the playground, right? That is demoralizing to these folks who are doing critically important work. So we're committed to working through these differences to get these confidence builders. So we think by the end of the year, we'll have a package of confidence builders that we both agree on. It will be bipartisan, and we think will answer a lot of Americans' questions they have about their faith in these programs.
Sure, just remember, tweet us questions if you have them while I've still got both of you. Let's turn it back to cybersecurity. Let's talk about CISPA. One of the big debates we had prior to passage of the legislation in the House this year was over minimization, whether a private company should have to take reasonable steps to minimize the private information that might ultimately land in the hands of the federal government. Is this a debate that has to be reopened? You know, you talked about confidence builders, but is this an issue that we need to return to, especially as information sharing finds itself a little bit bogged down in some of the Snowden saga?
Well, a couple of things. I'm not sure it ever went away. We've had really healthy discussions about who should minimize. My concern was this. Our whole goal with getting threat information, malicious source code sharing, and that's really all we need, when I say we, the intelligence community needs, in order to make sure that they increase the level of the private sector's ability to protect itself and the government's ability to protect itself. All of the information that would come with it, and it's not content driven, by the way, at all, is extraneous anyway. But here was the problem. You were putting the burden of helping the government help the country defend itself on smaller companies that might not be able to afford the necessary minimization requirements, and then it exposed them to all of this liability. And the whole goal of this is you want everybody participating in real time, hundreds of millions of times a second, and we're talking about malicious source code here. We're not talking about content. And that was what's so frustrating about this debate, is people got it mixed up that the NSA now is going to read emails or do those kinds of things. So we tried to build some protections and some ways that people could understand that's not what this is about. This is about cyber threat information sharing in real time. Has to be real time. And so this minimization process would happen. So the company would have to try to minimize what data we all believe and would recognize as is PII, personal identifying information, which most would be able to do anyway. But the other ones that couldn't won't, so that means they won't share, right? So now that means a vulnerability in our system. And then it's going to go to the government, who is required by law to minimize. So my argument was, if you like the minimization firewall that we have, why would we require the private sector to do it and then send it to the government, who's going to have to do it again anyway? And who can do that better than anyone, candidly, because they do it and we watch them do it and we kick them when we think they're not doing it, is the NSA. And we watch that like a hawk. So my argument is, why don't we have the best filter for PII being at not the business expense, because I think defending the United States is all of our expense, and we get more participation. Do I win the argument at the end of the day? We've had this conversation.
The participation is what counts. Mike said it before, 80% of our internet in the United States is the private sector. So it's important that the private sector be involved, and that's what our bill's about. It's about encouraging the business sector to get involved and to work in a partnership. Right now, with the President's executive order, we can only now, and it hasn't really been implemented, they're working on it now, only pass information real time that's unclassified. But we have serious threats out there with the cyber threats. People ask me, as a member of the Gang of Eight, Mike's a member of the Gang of Eight, what keeps you up at night? And I'll say spicy Mexican food, weapons of mass destruction, and cyber attacks. And in order to, and we have lost in the last 3 or 4 years, Cyber Command has estimated about $400 billion. That's not million, $1 billion has been stolen, mostly China. And it's small companies. China, it's like a gift that keeps giving for them. They will even cyber attack fertilizer companies because they're in that business, and they want to get the codes. They want to get the recipes to keep competing. And again, just imagine how many jobs $400 billion is. So in order for us to bring this massive issue of cyber together, the partnership has to be there. And part of our bill to encourage business to be involved is the information sharing and the liability if they use good faith effort. And if you ask a fertilizer company to how do you minimize, they'll have to hire somebody to do that, and that might deal with their cash flow issue. They might not even want to do it, so they're not going to be involved. 100% participation we'll never have, but the more we have, the safer we are as a government.
Can I just bring up why this is so important? For whatever you think of the healthcare law, we're not going to get into a debate of that.
Nope, not here.
Not here. But on October 1st, they opened up these exchanges. They created a federal data hub. And think about this. It has real-time connection to 7 different storage centers of information, the most personal, private information of every American in the United States that actually files their taxes, right? Or communicates with the government in other ways. There is no way in God's green earth they can secure that system today. We should be outraged by this, right? They can't do it. I noticed, I heard McAfee, the guy that created McAfee, I think it was yesterday or last night, was saying this is, I won't quote him exactly, but a hacker's dream come true, right? This is happening today. We are exposed today. We're going to spend a lot of time saying, well, how is the NSA really a bad place doing bad things? And we have exposed every personal, I will tell you, we are going to have problems with this if we haven't already and just don't know it. They can't secure it. And they'll say, well, we don't store it on the hub. We should all be concerned about this. We should all be working on this. We all should make sure that if I were king for a day, the NSA would be over there trying to make sure that those systems are secure. They're not. We don't do that. They won't do that. That's a huge problem for us. So every organized criminal group in the world that 300,000 times a day goes after your credit card, now has the ability to continue to go after, and by the way, 1 out of 3 of every phishing attempts, by the way, the number one way they'll breach your system is successful. 1 out of 3. Think about the hundreds or tens of millions of people who are already into that system, who get your personal credit history, they get some of your health stuff, they get your social security number, it all populates a website. I tell you what, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up that we have exposed Americans so needlessly on the cybersecurity front. We better fix this before we continue to move forward on this system, or we will all regret it, I'm telling you right now as we're sitting here. And I tell you what, there's a little piece of saliva on the corner of a mouth of a former Russian KGB agent in the Eastern Caucasus right now thinking this is my dream come true. I'll get all the information I need to steal the money that I need to steal to make me a very wealthy man. And unfortunately, he won't be alone.
Congressman Ruppersberger, what do you think about this healthcare data portal? Is this a serious concern to you as well?
Of course it is. But anything that we do, whether it's what we do in intelligence, whether we do national security, whether in banking, let's get back to the issue of our cyber bill, and it needs to be passed or we're not going to be safe as a country. From a destructive attack, Iran, or it's been said in the media that Iran attacked Aramco, the largest oil company for Saudi Arabia, knocked out 30,000 of their computers. That could happen to Iran, who's not as sophisticated as China and Russia and other countries, could do that to our banking system right now. We know Iran exports terrorism. They tried to kill the Saudi Arabia ambassador in the United States. So they're capable of doing those type of things. It's like if you're a meteorologist and you see Hurricane Sandy coming up the East Coast, and you can't tell anybody. And that's how we feel with the CISPA bill. We have done whatever we need to do to deal with the issues of privacy. We have oversight. Tammy Duckworth, who you just had before, said that in the beginning she didn't want to vote for our bill because there's a perception that you're going to violate privacy. And Mike and I have worked for years trying to deal with those issues and make sure those issues of privacy are taken care of. But if we do not pull this together soon, we're going to keep getting exposed. 400 billion. It's a number, but it's big and it's real of what we have stolen. And now with what Snowden did, and that we have a breach there, these are areas that we are vulnerable until we can come together as a nation. And the only way that I see doing that is to have our CISPA bill passed. We got overwhelming support in the House. And Mike and I were really surprised at how many votes we got. But we educated people for 1 year. We took the freshman class to NSA. We let them know this is the threat, this is the privacy issues, these are the checks and balances we have. And we got overwhelming support. This is a new group of people that came in. And we were very surprised at that. But now we need to move forward and get the bill passed. And I'm concerned because of all the issues involving Snowden and other areas that are out there that the bill is going to slow down. And the longer we wait, the more I believe it's Congress's fault that we're not protecting our country.
Sure. So, and you both have said repeatedly, I remember back in October of last year, as the cybersecurity debate kind of got back into gear, that the House Intel Committee had worked very closely with Chairwoman Feinstein, with Senator Chambliss, coming up with some kind of resolution to this debate. But here we are in October 2013, and there still isn't even a Senate bill. Does that concern the both of you? What do you sense is the holdup here?
Well, again, we've had long conversations. There still is a big divide in the Senate, and I think the Senate is in a better place today, having more members fully aware of what the threats are. I mean, when we started this, if we said cybersecurity, we could have put 3 people in this room that would have been interested, and now half of you are asleep already. Okay, lighten up. It's okay. So that's been helpful to us in that people are understanding, hey, this is a threat. The threat matrix is going up. Not only are there are people going after your credit cards and your personal identity. Guess what? We have nation states trying to bring down our financial services networks today. Right? Today. This isn't Orwellian. This is happening today. So this is a serious, real, and growing threat. And we can no longer hand-wring about what people might think versus what the facts are. And I think we're finding that in the Senate. We're winning friends and advocates in the Senate of both parties who are coming to the conclusion we better do something. And the one smallest piece that we can do is this cyber sharing piece, this information sharing piece, that we think we can build in all the protections, all the privacy protections, and still have a functioning real-time effort. So I think that's what the holdup is. they have different rules. This thing might show up on a bill that looks a little different than the way we would do it in the House. I don't think we care about that. I think we've talked about that. It's all end game for us. If it gets on the, an agriculture bill in the Senate, we can argue that case too. We'd be for it.
And we want a bill that will pass that the public will feel secure, that their privacy rights are taken care of. You don't have privacy, if you don't have security. You don't have security if you don't have privacy. So we're painstakingly evaluating all the issues, and we're listening from the privacy groups. But we all then have to sit back and say, these are the check and balances. We probably have more check and balances in what we do in our Fourth Amendment and all of the privacy issues that are out there than any other country in the world. And yet still we haven't gotten where we need to get. So we have to keep working on it. And again, I know that bill's out there and we'd like to see it going. I think right now we have to take care of the issue with NSA and to make sure people have confidence that NSA is not, or the intelligence community is not listening and the checks and balances are there. Because they probably do as much as any agency in the United States of America to protect us from attacks, especially terrorist attacks and cyber attacks.
Sure. Let's ask this then, and we've posed this question earlier. Should we expect some sort of cybersecurity law by the end of the year? Should we expect information sharing to conclude before the end of 2013, or is that looking increasingly unlikely as we find ourselves talking about FISA, talking about the shutdown, things of that sort?
You might not expect it. You ought to pray for it.
But we've done it. It's in the Senate.
Yeah, we passed our bill, and
overwhelmingly.
And if we can get something into conference, and I believe we can, we will work out our differences in a way that I think.
And also the good news, we've been working very closely with the administration, the White House, on the NSA issue and trying to get the facts out there. And I think that Mike and I have even developed a better relationship with the staff and the people that are advising the president, so we all understand where these threats are and try to pull these issues closer. And I think whether you're Republican, Democrat, administration, we all know that we have to deal with the issue of privacy and we have to deal with the perception of privacy. And we're going to try to do that to change certain legislation, be more transparent. Maybe even the courts who can be trusted, they're federal judges, but there's a perception that there's a rubber stamp there. And we have to do things to change that. Maybe after a case, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but looking at things that some of these FISA opinions, as long as we don't violate sources and methods, can be shown to the public if they're really interested. We've got to deal with that perception of privacy.
Sure, you mentioned that perception and transparency.
Yes.
Applied to the cybersecurity realm, do we need to have a new conversation about the sort of threats we can newly declassify? As all this information is being shared between the public and private sector under the sorts of systems envisioned by CISPA or whatever the Senate might ultimately produce, there's going to be a lot of threat data. At some point, do we have to take a step back and think, hey, can we put more of this information out? Can we share more with the public about what we're seeing and how we're addressing it in the cybersecurity realm?
Well, again, the whole notion of the way we designed the information sharing bill was the government does an exceptionally good job about going and try to find out what are threats out there that maybe somebody hasn't used yet. Think about a very classic case. Public reports show that Iran went after Saudi Aramco, very sophisticated, more than we thought. And there are public reports that say Iran is attacking our financial institutions using DDoS attacks that is low end, but has a degree of sophistication, which means they have something that they haven't used yet. So they're probably looking for some vulnerabilities that should make us all a little bit nervous. Well, in that same vein, there are things that we know exist that are pretty bad and pretty awful. And the intelligence community can bring that back and try to protect government networks. But we can't share it because of the very classification of it with the private sector so they can protect their own networks. Remember, 80% of our networks are private. That's a huge problem. So what we wanted to do is find an environment as far upstream as you can get where you can share in real time information that the federal government might have, but it does no good if it becomes public. Because then they'll change that threat matrix and it'll come right back at you. And so we've got to find a way to protect ourselves from things that we know exist but haven't hit your network yet. That's why we think this is the right way to do it. Is there other ways can we continue to engage in things that we all know is out there and can share in a public forum? Some of that's already being done in the private sector. We applaud that, great. But I think we've got to be careful about that really nasty top 10, 15, 20% of these really nasty malicious attacks that are very sophisticated. That's the stuff you want to keep classified.
Sure. Congressman Ruppersberger, we've got about a minute or so left. You get the last
That's
word
good
here.
luck answering that one. Go ahead.
Yeah.
In a minute. Okay. Oh, you want me to continue?
Oh, yeah, no, please.
Well, you know, let me conclude by saying that we know what the threats are and I'm going to get into cyber. We know what the threats are. We have worked hard to bring in all groups to deal with, and I'm going to focus on the CISPA bill. And as a result of us passing the bill, and I think the reason we had an overwhelming bill, the president was against it, and a lot of people on my side we thought were against it. But Mike and I took a year to educate the members, new members, old members who didn't vote for our bill the first time. And as a result of the education, knowing what the threat is, knowing that we're dealing with the privacy issues. And another big issue too, I think Tammy Duckworth said it, when we knew that we had to deal with perception issues, we didn't want the military to be in control of this. So we put in an amendment, Mike and I put in an amendment with McCall and Benny Thompson, that the Homeland Security would be the agency that would be overseeing that. That was a major step that allowed us to get a lot more votes. So I just think that we can learn from the negatives to go to the positives. I think where we are now, we're in a bad way, but I think this might be bringing a lot of us together more in the future.
We will certainly see. Again, want to thank you, Chairman Rogers, Congressman Ruppersberger. You guys stick around. First, though, we're going to invite our partner Raytheon back on stage, and with a few remarks is Jack Harrington, the Vice President of Cybersecurity and Special Missions at Raytheon. Again, Congressman, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Johnny.
This way, guys. This way.
Morning. So Raytheon's a very proud sponsor today with Politico for this event, and I hope you're all having a wonderful time. Very informational for us, and there's no one on the planet more qualified to talk to us today about cyber prevention than the Director of the National Security Agency, General Keith Alexander. As I'm sure you know, in 2010, General Alexander also took over as the commander of the U.S. Cyber Command. What you may not know is that he is the longest tenured director of the NSA, about twice as long as others. He's been serving on the front lines of securing this nation throughout his illustrious career and really leading in technology. And today we're very honored to have him here with us. In his dual role, he's responsible for the protection of DoD networks, foreign national intelligence, combat support, and the national security information protection. So it's a lot. He's a very, very busy man, and so we're lucky that he's here with us today to speak to us about this important topic. I understand he also has 15 grandchildren, so as you can imagine, he has to find time not only to protect us all, but to protect his children and grandchildren and his big family. So today it is my great honor and privilege to introduce the Director of the National Security Agency, General Keith Alexander.
General Alexander, thank you so much for being here. And for those who are curious, as you were standing on the side of the stage, you were like, I have one more grandchild. You have 16?
Yeah, because it's 2 to the 4th. You have to mathematically get these correct. And I'm the 16th director, which is also 2 to the 4th, so we had to match those up. And it's taken 8+ years. That's actually why I stayed there. We only had 3 or 4 grandchildren when I came in. I said, well, we got to fix this.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We've asked this question to everybody today, and you're not going to escape it either, and that's about grandchildren and the government shutdown. You know, we just heard from Chairman Rogers that some of the critical intelligence workers have been brought back at the DoD and some other places as well. But talk about what the shutdown has done to the cybersecurity mission across the government.
Well, I think the most damage is to the morale of the workforce when I look at it. Mm-hmm. You know, from an NSA perspective, we have 966 PhDs as of about a week and a half ago, over 1,000 mathematicians, over 4,000 computer scientists. And when we tell them, you're not accepted, we need to keep you at home for a while, their whole purpose in life, and I heard Mike Rogers and Chairman Rogers and Vice Chairman Ruppersberger talking a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you think about what these people take an oath to do is to protect and defend this country and our civil liberties and privacy. and we're telling them to stay at home. How do you get good talent to come into government when we treat them like that? So that's the first part. We did ensure that the most critical terrorist-related missions went on, and those to protect life and limb. But the reading the rules in the law and making sure we do this exactly right, and we do follow the rules in the law in all cases, what you find out is it's really impacts the morale and welfare of the folks. And when you think about some of these young folks that you bring on, you're telling them, well, I can't pay you for the week that you were on furlough. That will come later. Many of you remember being young last year, and for me. And when you think about it, we live paycheck to paycheck, and that's what they do. And we're making it hard for them to stay with the government, and that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong.
Sure. You know, there's the shutdown, and then there's Snowden. And I feel like we can't have a conversation about cybersecurity and information sharing unless we delve into both of those sorts of things. So
Shut down Snowden?
Shut down Snowden.
I'm with you on this.
Two different things. So when it comes to Snowden, though, you know, I attended a cybersecurity event with you earlier this month where you talked a lot about information sharing, even in the context of Snowden. You urged industry to help spread the word about the importance of these programs to exchange information with the federal government. Have you found, though, it's a harder sell on information sharing on Capitol Hill? And what can be done to help restore the trust? You know, lots of questions about confidence builders we got from Chairman Rogers. How's the sell been? How do you fix the trust problem?
Well, I think you got to start out with the facts. And this is where, and the main reason for me coming here, we need the facts on the table so that we can make informed decisions about our future in defending our nation and protecting our civil liberties and privacy. Let me give you a couple cases in point. We actually had a discussion with a senior CEO over the last few weeks, and he guessed about what we did with the program and found out that's entirely wrong. What we're authorized to do with the business record FISA, or Section 215, is to get from the phone companies information about phone calls, your number, the number it called, the date, time group, and the duration, period. There is no name, there is no content, there is no email, there is no phone conversation. The to, the from number, and what we're authorized to do, and only what we're authorized to do, is when we have reasonable articulable suspicion that a Al-Qaeda or related terrorist group is calling into the country, as they did in 9/11, or prior to 9/11, that we can look into that data set and ask the question, is there somebody calling into the country that the FBI should know about, that NSA as a foreign intelligence agency can see, help them understand the threat, and then pass it to the FBI, where if they need to go into it, they can get the probable cause warrant and take it up. In 2012, we approved 288 numbers to search into that database with. That's it. So the facts have been greatly sensationalized and inflamed, not informed. So step one, we need to inform the debate. And you're right, absolutely right, because as we go into this, if people are that far off on this program, where will we go in cyber? And it's much more difficult to understand for many of the people who help write the laws. And this is where you can be of great help. Put the facts out, understand those facts, get those out to the American people. We're a foreign intelligence agency. We see things with our time in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world, threats that originate overseas that are coming into this country. Ours is a noble cause. Our job is to defend this nation and to protect our civil liberties and privacy. It's not either or. We have to do both. And I would tell you that those of you who would take the time to look at the oversight and compliance, the roles of the court, the roles of Congress, administration officials, and our own, that oversight and compliance regimen that we have is better than any other country in the world in protecting our civil liberties and privacy, and that of foreign citizens. You know, it's interesting, when you look at some of the willful and knowing compliance issues that we have where we held people accountable, the majority, the vast majority, were on foreign people. If you do it wrong, you do it wrong, period. Our job is to do it right, and we hold the people accountable for that.
Sure. Still, General Alexander, there's plenty of conversation on Capitol Hill about restricting the NSA's authorities in this realm. The one big debate one of the big debates to emerge has to do with restricting the agency's ability to collect bulk call records. What are your thoughts about this? We've heard Senator Patrick Leahy call for this sort of thing. Others on the Hill have not. What do you think about making that sort of change, or what changes might you be open to?
Well, this is going to be a political and a policy decision. Having said that, I'll give you my thoughts. And this is always dangerous. I can see some of my staff going, uh-oh. But I figured you asked a question and you're due a good answer in this. I believe it's in our nation's best interest to put all this phone data into a repository that you, the American people, know what we're doing is right with it. That you have confidence that the oversight, compliance, and the ways that we look at it, the auditing and the controls, is exactly right. That's step one. To ensure we don't have another 9/11. You know, all of us here are old enough to remember 9/11. And we made a commitment at 9/11 that would never happen again. And one of the reasons it happened is because we didn't have a database like this. We didn't have a repository that would allow us to connect the dots. The intelligence community was found lacking by the 9/11 Commission. We came up with the tools that we believe we need to do that. And so I think that's an important tool. I am absolutely open to how we give greater transparency to it. You know, I would love to come up with an idea, and so I'm completely open. If you've got a better idea, put it on the table. That's step one. If you don't, then are the oversight and compliance regimen that we have, is that sufficient? What more could we or should we do? What more on transparency and reporting could and should we do? Where I would be concerned, if we don't know there's a threat, we can't stop it. 9/11 showed us that. Don't put us back to the beginning and have us relearn the rule, the lessons that we learned from 9/11 with the deaths of more Americans. Here's a great statistic. You know, I'm not really good on statistics. Well, maybe a little bit.
That's okay. I can't add. You're fine.
Yeah. In the week ending 23 September, from 16 to 23 September, 972 people were killed in Kenya, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan by terrorists and terrorist-associated things, and over 1,000 wounded. In the past 12 years, from foreign terrorists, 2 people, Los Angeles, 2002. That's not by accident. That's by a lot of hard work overseas by our military and intelligence community, and here by law enforcement with the tools and the capabilities we have. So what I would say is go careful, make sure we do it right. I have 16 grandchildren. I want to see all of them grow up and have a great and wonderful life, and all the people in our country should have that same opportunity. And I am the biggest advocate of the internet. I think we should have privacy and civil liberties there. I think we should manage this. We've got to grow it as we go.
Sure. So just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, and please feel free to correct me here, you'd be more open to changes that might make the process more transparent, but when it comes to the collection and use of that data, that's where you mostly believe the NSA's current authorities should stay intact.
I think the authority should stay intact. I'm open for transparency. I'm open for where we put the data, how we, you know, all the rules that go in. The real issue is where I get uncomfortable, being brutally candid, is, you know, if only the good guys were in the room and there were no terrorists in here, we tell you exactly everything that's going on. And if the terrorists didn't know, then you say, well, that's how they're going to get them. It's a good thing. It's like football, right? You don't let the defense come over and listen to the play, and you say, okay, everybody got the play, everybody good? But that's what we're doing in terrorists, right? We're saying, you got it, the good guys got it, the bad guys got it. In football, okay, so Army didn't do good this weekend, but next weekend perhaps. In football, you don't do that. Why would we give an advantage to terrorists? And that's the issue. So how do we ensure that the American people know what we're doing is exactly right without letting the terrorists know how to circumvent this? That's the real issue that we face.
Sure. So let's switch this conversation back to cybersecurity. You're dual-hatted as both the leader of the NSA and as the leader of U.S. Cyber Command. With all of these questions that have surfaced about the NSA's authorities and the sort of actions the government would like to take in cyberspace, what do you think is the future of leadership of those two? Should they remain dual-hatted? Do you think that's a good capability to preserve? Or going forward, is that something worth rethinking?
No, absolutely. I believe it has to remain dual-headed. Here's why. Unity of effort. We don't have two internets. And the issue will quickly become who's in charge when. And the answer can't be, we won't tell you what we're doing, you don't tell us what you're doing, we don't have we, they. And I think Secretary Gates, in the decision, in the rationale that he put into putting these together, remains true today. He had some great insights from his time over at CIA in the early 90s to his time as the Secretary of Defense. Unity of effort, unity of command and control, leveraging what we have at NSA, all the technical talent and the access, is absolutely in the best interest of this country. Now, as you stated, I'm eventually will leave this job, knock on wood. Okay.
There you go.
That's close. But, when you think about that, from my perspective, if you try to break them up, what you have is two teams not working together. And what our nation can't afford, especially in this budget environment, is to have the other team, one team, try to rebuild what the other team does. And then fight over resources, fight over who's in charge. And instead of saying, how do we act as a team? The one thing I'm the most proud of these two teams is when they sit down together, you know what they call themselves? Team Cyber. That's for this country and our allies. They act as a team all the way. And the reason is because we treat them as one team, not two. And that's what our nation needs. Now, we've learned that multiple times, that you can separate them. And what we'll end up doing is like doing an extra lap, when you were bad at track or something. Maybe I might have been once. You have to do an extra lap. We don't want our teams out there doing a lap while the policymakers decide where we should be. So from my perspective, you absolutely need to keep the dual hat arrangement.
Sure. The other question when it comes to structure is whether Cyber Command should be a unified command, whether it should take the next level. And there have always been debates about this on Capitol Hill, it being relatively new compared to everything else at the Pentagon. Talk to us about the future of U.S. Cyber Command and where it should go from here.
I do think it should be a unified command. I think the question is when. Mm-hmm. When do you do it? When do you take that step? Because the reality is that commander, whoever it will be at that time, is the one who is and has the most insights on this area. Now, I'll be real honest. General Bob Kaler out at STRATCOM is absolutely superb. He's retiring in a couple months, one of the finest military officers in our country today. Absolutely superb gentleman, and the way he operates that, there are no issues between us, no daylight. And I'm thankful that a guy like he is in the job because he lets us do what the nation needs us to do. But that's not always the case. And so what you can't afford is to have Cyber Command responding to the Secretary of the President and then a commander who is not directly in the loop on some of these, who is responsible. So in the unified command, he's responsible, but we're executing, but he doesn't know actually what we're doing in all these areas. And so what we've done, and the reason that I would push for a unified command as we get this up and running along the next couple of years, is because you don't want to hold him accountable for something that guy over there is doing. And that's the real reason for a unified command.
Sure. Just a reminder to everybody out there, please tweet us questions. It's at Politico Events. We'd love to ask them for you. But until then,
you took
I'm just
away
gonna
my
keep
iPhone.
going. Oh, yeah?
Oh, I can't tweet.
Yeah, no, you're not allowed to tweet. So you're talking about the future of U.S. Cyber Command, and one of the things that you've discussed pretty extensively, especially on Capitol Hill, has been growing the ranks of so-called cyber warriors, about hiring the new talented folks. But at the same time, repeatedly, House and Senate authorizers and appropriators have raised questions about where one might find and recruit and how one might pay for that talent. Give us a sense of where you all are in attracting these workers and what can be done better to reach out to them.
You know, it's amazing. So many pictures when you say attracting. I have all this breadcrumbs leading up to. Actually, on the NSA side, which can influence under the Cyber Command side, we have a lot of applicants. Around 20 to 40,000 for 2,000 jobs. Really high-tech people. Yeah, it's amazing. We put out for a civil liberties and privacy officer. We had 67 people send in their resumes for that. It's amazing. So what do we need to do in this? And this gives you some insights of where we need to grow. I think for young people coming into the service, I think, if I was coming back into the service, what would I like to do? Can you imagine coming back into the service and being able to work in cyber? Wouldn't that be great? I mean, just think how wonderful that would be. And so our job is, look, come in, be willing to work, we'll train you, you'll have a commitment, you'll get a tremendous education in cyber, our country will benefit and you'll benefit. And then after 5, 6 years, if you want to stay on, we have great mechanisms. So the military, I think for the cyber force, will have tremendous things. Young kids, and you think about it, I have my grandchildren, a 1-year-old was on an iPad like this. She knows how to go through the iPad, get to Netflix, find the Disney Channel, do all these things. It's amazing. Well, she's almost 2 now. And I think my daughter told me this to show me that girls are smarter than boys. I'm not sure. There's a subtle message here. But this generation is coming up cyber savvy. Tremendous opportunity. We can train them, we can educate them, our nation benefits. Look at all the companies that need this out there. It's good for our nation. And we have the technical foundation and the academic acumen at NSA to help build the knowledge set for these people. It is a great capability that we ought to bring together. So I don't see an issue there, and I'm not getting it from the services that's yet an issue in hiring. I'll tell you, you started out with the shutdown on Snowden.
No, I wasn't going there.
Okay, and the real issue is when you get talent, especially on the civilian side, that can go out where the military has an obligation, civilians don't necessarily have that obligation. If we don't treat them right, they can leave. That hurts our national security. We've got to take care of them.
Sure, but as you said, we can hire them, we can educate them, but then the big question becomes, what do you do with them? And we've heard you talk on the Hill about hiring these cyber offensive teams, stationing them, but not a lot of conversation about what happens from there, what the rules of engagement might be in cyberspace. How has that evolved? Are we ever going to hear a statement from the Pentagon, from the NSA, from Cyber Command about how we envision what cyber offense is?
Nope. No, I'm just kidding. Well, let me give you a couple of examples. Theoretical, if I might. If our nation is attacked in cyberspace, Secretary of Defense Panetta said, that's Defense Department's mission is to defend this country, and that includes in cyberspace. So how do you do that? Well, that gets you to the cyber legislation discussion you had with Chairman Rogers and Congressman Ruppersberger. It gets you into the authorities. Right now, those authorities are defensive in nature. I think that's good and reasonable. What that tells all of you is that any offensive capabilities that we would use in cyber have to be approved specifically by the Secretary of Defense and the President. Civilian leadership and control, I think that's right. What you will get to, I think, as we go down the road, is under what conditions do you react to defend, say, Wall Street from a real crisis? That's where we're going to end up at some point. So we have to have the rules in place that you can defend Wall Street from being taken down and inform the civilian leadership, analogous to the way you do nuclear command and control, but at light speed. So think about that. How do you do that? How do you set this up? So those are policy issues and legal issues that we're working through with the administration, with Congress, with everyone. What you would expect from us, a trained and ready force. So train our military and civilians how they should react to defend this country. What are the things that you would reasonably expect them to be able to do? And that's what we would do. We would set up the ability so they know how to operate in that environment. What you wouldn't do is say, you're all infantry, Unfortunately, we're not going to train you on offensive stuff yet until we get into a real war. Then we'll start training you. People are going to look at you and say, well, that's crazy, right? So we have to train them. They have to know the left and right limits. They have to know how to do compliance. They have to know how to protect civil liberties and privacy. They have to know how to act in cyberspace responsibly. And we have to know that they've been accredited to do that. So think of that as licensing. So it's just like a pilot. They've got to prove that what they can do, they can pass the test. We know they're reliable, they're dependable, they're going to do it right. And the offense and defense have to work together because our job is to defend the nation, right? If somebody's attacking this country, things are going to get through. How do you defend the nation in cyberspace? What are the cyber protection teams doing? How do we educate people on future threats? That's why cyber legislation, in my opinion, is so important. We have to be able to talk with industry and get feedback from industry on things like that. Because if we can't see a threat, it goes back to that Edmund Burke. I really like this Edmund Burke, our deputy director, Chris Inglis has this thing up there. It says, all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But if you don't know that something bad is happening, whether it's in terrorism or cyber, you can't act. And if somebody doesn't tell us that they're attacking Wall Street, we can't act until it's too late. Now, we have a great forensics team. If you think about it, you say, wait, what do you mean forensics? Yeah, it's all over. Bad things have happened. We can come down and say, it was really bad. And the guy whose network this was, I know that. Yeah, I said, but no, let me tell you how bad it really was. And we can lay out a laundry list of all the bad things. He said, look, I know it's bad. All my stuff is gone. Yeah, but it's really bad. That doesn't make sense. And so we need that capability. There's another attribute, if I could here. Partnerships, alliances. Cyber is made for alliances. Government to industry, government to government. And we've got to get out in front of that. And I heard some of your comments earlier. Snowden has hurt both within the country, the trust deficit, and with our allies. We have to pick that up and we have to fix that. And that's where industry and the government have to work together. And one of the reasons that I'm here, you can help us get this right.
Sure. Let's take a step back, though. You talked about training and accrediting these folks working with the Pentagon, with U.S. Cyber Command, to find and address these cyber threats in real time. But to what extent do those capabilities need to be made public? I mean, here we find ourselves in this debate over FISA and the Patriot Act and exactly what should be transparent, what needs to be a state secret. When it comes to U.S. Cyber Command and its activities, cyber offense or defense, if you see a physical attack, the response is easy to pinpoint. You can see the physical response. In cybersecurity, it's much different. So to what extent does there need to be greater disclosure, or should there be any?
Well, I think you've put an analogy. Let's take your analogy a step further and then paint that back to cyber. So if you have a missile coming into the United States, everybody agrees a missile coming into the United States, we ought not to see if it's going to hit a military installation or a civilian. If it's going to hit a civilian, say, go ahead. We'd say, no, that's Defense Department responsibility. Stop that missile, please. How about a cyber packet that's going to destroy Wall Street? Now, for you to detect that missile, what are you doing? You have a radar. You have an intelligence system. You know about their missiles. You know about their launch sequence. You know what their infrared signatures look like. You know all this technical data. You know if that warhead is coming, what it probably has in its payload. We don't share that data publicly. And in cyber, it's going to be very similar. What you're going to say is, we're going to know things about the adversary's capabilities that need to be kept secret. But what the American people should know is that when it comes to working with industry, we have to be transparent. You have to know that what industry is sharing with us is not personally identifiable information. It is threat information about somebody trying to attack that they can give back to us and say, this threat signature came from that IP address, was going over there. And it might go to FBI, it might go to DHS, it might go to us, but it should go to all three at once. And then the appropriate agency would take responsibility. If you don't have that capability, you can't act. Now, what should we reveal? There are a lot of pieces of malicious software that are out there that are publicly, and we should put all that out and protect all our systems from it. That takes away much of the spear phishing and spam stuff that they were talking about. 1 out of 3 are successful. Well, actually, it's successful because somebody opened up something they shouldn't. They did something they shouldn't. So educating people, understanding the threat, training people, that's one thing that we can and should do a better job at. But if we know something about an adversary that's very sensitive, we may have to share that with industry and ask them to keep that quiet, treat that as classified. And then if that comes, let us know, because we got a big problem. That's a missile coming our way. Our country needs to know, and we need to stop it. And I think the American people and our allies, depending on who's being hit with this, needs to know that we'll do that right. That's where the trust factor has to be built back. Because right now, the way the Snowden thing has been sensationalized and inflamed makes it sound like we're listening to all phone calls and we're reading everybody's emails. That is factually incorrect. 1, it would be impossible, and 2, it would be illegal. So when you look at that, how do we set that right? How do you help us get that word out? Go ahead.
Sure. You know, that though leads to a point that was made by Senator Chambliss earlier today, which is that one of the big hang-ups on the Senate side of information sharing has to deal with what sort of countermeasures are okay for a company to take when given information from the federal government, and the extent to which you should protect them from liability if something were to go wrong. Any thoughts to add on the congressional side of that?
I think that's one of the key issues in this, is where and how far do you go on liability. I'll tell you, from my perspective, if the government gives companies information, so I tell a company, I'm using me as the generic government telling a company, stop this traffic, and I make a mistake, and that government stops it, so you stop it, and the information that was coming in also stops good traffic, and so you now get sued because I did something wrong, you shouldn't be held liable for a mistake the government made. That's where I come down initially. Now, there is issues on the liability, and I think we just have to work, that's where Congress actually has to work that out. What I can do is help them understand from a technical perspective the thoughts on this. And I do think we have to have liability in there. We have to have the information sharing. I do think I think between what Chairman Rogers and Ruppersberger told you and what Senator Chambliss and Feinstein, they're getting closer to this. There are some issues, and I think we have to work those out.
Sure. To take a step back, I'd be remiss not to ask, since you mentioned both Wall Street and countermeasures, the extent to which U.S. Cyber Command or NSA got involved in the series of Iranian attacks on U.S. commercial banks. You know, these were attacks on mostly their consumer portals, but any comment on the reports that U.S. Cyber Command wanted to take a pretty aggressive role there in addressing that threat?
Yeah, I think that's blown out of proportion. What we would do, what you would expect us to do, is come up with countermeasures, not just U.S. Cyber Command and NSA, FBI too, all of us. What is it that you would want and expect the government to do? And the answer is create capabilities that could defend Wall Street. Put those up to the policymakers, and they determine when we use them. I am confident that the process works well. And we get our say in that. And from my perspective, they understand both sides. They look at it and they say, okay, this is being handled right. I actually think, it's made out, somebody made it sound like, well, I want to go get A. Nope, my responsibility is put the options on the table for the policymakers to make a decision with. And I think actually great people involved in that process. And I've sat in for the last 8 years in discussions like this. And I think really, if the American people could watch those discussions, they would be really heartened by the amount of effort people put into ensuring we come up with the right decision.
Sure. Let's take some questions that were sent to me over Twitter. Somebody had asked, what's the status of the expansion of the Defense Industrial Base Framework Program and the DIB pilot on critical infrastructure?
Well, I think this is one that we've got to continue to expand and provide capabilities back, not only to the defense infrastructure, but to all critical industry. So I would expand it far beyond that. In the defense infrastructure, and in the cyber legislation, the issue is, how do we come up with a defensible architecture and framework for our country? And specifically in this case, how does the government share what it knows in a classified methodology with industry? That's where we've got to get to. And we've got to come up with a viable construct. Here's my thoughts on that construct. If you look at the way the internet is framed, the light and how it works, and how it comes into our country, the internet service providers are the ones that actually own and operate the vast majority of the internet, the tier 1 internet service providers. And they do a tremendous job in filtering out distributed denial of service attacks and other bad malware. They would be the first point of defense of seeing something bad going on. So we would share with them stuff. They would come back. They don't need to tell us what was in an email. They just need to tell us, I saw a bad piece of malware going from point A to point B. Share that with the government, and that would include DHS, FBI, NSA, and Cyber Command, all at real time. And then those agencies can take appropriate action. So if you did that, then what we're talking about in the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, and that program is ensuring that everybody benefits from that first level of protection. Now that still means you got to have the right antivirus protection software, you still got to have good network hygiene, you've got to take care of all the basics. But you could set up a framework, and if you think of this technically, that framework would hugely help this country defend itself in cyberspace, and it would help other countries as well. And we ought to share that, and we are sharing that with our allies.
Sure. Well, General Alexander, I think we are almost out of time, so one last question for you here, and that's about, to go back to where we started, the issue of trust. Where do we have to go from here to restore trust in the work that NSA and U.S. Cyber Command is doing, especially as we begin to think anew about new capabilities at Cyber Command, new information sharing, new frameworks to protect critical infrastructure? How do we assuage everyone's concerns across the board, U.S. and international?
We have to start with the facts, plain and simple. You know, I read a lot, you know, there's 2,776 privacy violations. You know, we take a report and we exaggerate or we don't understand it, and we sensationalize and inflame versus inform. So from my perspective, we need the facts. The American people must know the facts. And I think if they knew the facts about the care that NSA goes to protect our civil liberties and privacy, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And our people do that better than anyone else in the world or any other country in the world, ours and our allies. And we ought to understand what that means. That's the first point. And the second point is this issue about what are you going to do to stop terrorism? You know, the hard part is an intelligence agency whose responsibility is foreign intelligence to defend this country. You know, immediately people say, well, I wonder what they're up to. You know, well, you would really be surprised to see just what you asked us to do. Defend this country, defend our civil liberties and privacy. That's what we're up to. And we take great pride in it. You know, we sent about a little over 6,000 people to Iraq and Afghanistan. After 9/11, we went forward to support our military. That's where we operate foreign space. 22 people, cryptologists, have lost their lives doing that. And they brought back a lot more of our lives because of what they did. You can talk to Dave Petraeus and others, and he will tell you it changed the tide in Iraq because of what these great people did. That's what NSA is. They're the noble ones. And it should be no doubt in our mind that they're the ones that the American people should look up to, not Snowden.
Sure. General Alexander, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the time. I thank you to all of our panelists who have helped us out here today, our partner Raytheon for all of their work, the amazing Politico events team that's running around somewhere here, and thank all of you for coming. We'll see you next time.